He walked into that restaurant with nothing but his military ID and a look cold enough to stop a man mid-sentence, and he did. Commander Nathan Reed didn't know her name. Didn't know she was worth $500 million. All he knew was the text she sent him that said 3 words, "Please come now." What happened next stunned the entire room and set off a chain of events neither of them ever saw coming. She thought she was hiring a soldier to run an errand. She had no idea she was handing him the key to her heart. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. You don't want to miss what happens next. The alarm on Nathan Reed's phone went off at 4:47 in the morning. Not because he set it for 4:47. He set it for 5 o'clock. His body just didn't care anymore. He lay still for a moment on the narrow bed in the spare bedroom. The master was still Emma's room, still decorated with the dinosaur stickers his wife had helped their daughter put up 3 years before she died, and he stared at the ceiling. Same ceiling. Same crack running from the light fixture toward the window. Same silence that was never quite silent enough to trick him into feeling at peace. He got up. That was the whole ritual. He got up. No meditation, no journaling. No slow stretching the way the base therapist had recommended twice, and Nathan had ignored twice. He just put his feet on the floor, stood up straight, the way the Navy had drilled into him across 22 years of service, and he started moving. He made coffee. He packed Emma's lunch peanut butter, no jelly apple slices, the small bag of pretzels she hoarded like a dragon guarding treasure. He laid her clothes out on the kitchen chair, because if he didn't, Emma would show up to school wearing a Halloween costume in March, and genuinely not understand why that was a problem. By 5:30, he had already responded to 14 emails from the base. By 6:15, he had reviewed the security detail schedule for the week. By 6:45, he was standing outside Emma's door, knocking twice the way she'd asked him to because, "Dad, I'm 8, not a baby. I need privacy." Time to move." A groan from inside. The sound of blankets being pulled tighter in protest. "Emma Grace Reed." 5 minutes. 0 minutes. Another groan. Then the shuffle of small feet. The door opened, and his daughter stood there, hair completely sideways. One eye still sealed shut, wearing a shirt that said "Future Paleontologist" and pajama pants covered in cartoon sloths. She looked exactly like her mother. It hit him the same way every morning. Like a wave you see coming and still can't brace for. "Dad," Emma said, squinting up at him. "You look tired." "I'm always tired." "You should sleep more. You should wake up faster." She walked past him toward the bathroom, patting his arm as she went. "We're both works in progress," she said solemnly, and Nathan had to press his lips together to keep from smiling too wide, because if Emma caught him smiling, she'd turn it into a negotiation for an extra 15 minutes of screen time. He dropped her at school at 7:40, watched her run toward the building without looking back. She never looked back. She was 8. She was invincible. She had no idea how much that single moment of watching her disappear through those doors cost him every single morning. He drove to the base. He did his job. His job at the moment was to oversee a civilian security consultation. The Navy had a program relatively new where active officers with certain skill sets could be temporarily assigned to work alongside private organizations on security matters, counterintelligence, risk assessment, protective detail, coordination. Nathan had been recommended for the assignment by his commanding officer, Captain Dolores Whitfield, who had phrased it the way she phrased everything directly and without room for argument. "Reed, you're sharp, you're professional, you don't talk too much, and you haven't taken leave in 2 years. This assignment is 10 weeks light duty by your standards, and it will keep you from going completely sideways before your next deployment. You're going." "Yes, ma'am." That was 3 weeks ago. The organization he'd been assigned to was Hale Technologies. A mid-sized firm by Silicon Valley standards, enormous by every other measure, operations in 42 states, contracts with 3 federal agencies, a reputation that was either brilliant or ruthless depending on who you asked. The CEO was a woman named Victoria Hale. Nathan had done his research before the first day the way he always did. Background: key personnel, organizational structure, publicly available information about the company's security posture. He'd read 2 articles about Victoria Hale in the process, skimmed them the way you skim something that isn't relevant to the operational picture, and formed no particular impression. Powerful, wealthy, private, reserved. That was the surface read. In person, she was different. He met her on his 3rd day at Hale Technologies in a glass-walled conference room on the 14th floor, where she was finishing a meeting with her legal team. Nathan had been asked to wait. He stood outside the glass arms at his sides, watching without staring the way 22 years in the Navy had trained him to watch everything. Victoria Hale was standing at the head of the table talking. She was sharp and deliberate, every word landing exactly where she intended it. The lawyers around her were all nodding. One of them tried to interject, started a sentence with, "However, Ms. Hale," and she simply kept talking. Not rudely, not aggressively, just with such absolute certainty that there was no space for however in the room. When the meeting ended, she stepped out, glanced at him and said, "Commander Reed." "Yes, ma'am." She studied him for exactly 2 seconds. He had the distinct impression she was running some kind of internal calculation. "Walk with me," she said. They walked. He noticed she moved quickly and never looked at her phone while walking, which he respected. Too many people tried to move and scroll at the same time and ended up doing neither well. "I've read your file," she said. "Then you know more about me than most civilians I work with. I know your service record. That's not the same as knowing you." She pushed open a door to a smaller conference room, stepped inside, gestured for him to follow. "Sit, please." He sat. She remained standing, which he suspected was deliberate. "Your CO tells me you're the best she has," Victoria said. "She also told me you'd hate being here. Captain Whitfield said that," she said, and I'm quoting, "Reed will do the job perfectly and resent every minute of it because he belongs at sea." She said it like a compliment. Nathan considered that. It is one. For a fraction of a second, just a fraction, something shifted in Victoria Hale's expression. Not softness exactly, more like recognition. "I appreciate honesty," she said. "I don't get much of it." "I imagine not." She sat down across from him then, and the dynamic shifted, became less of a CEO conducting an evaluation and more of 2 people having an actual conversation. Nathan noticed the shift. He filed it away. "What do you need from me, Ms. Hale?" he asked. "Your professional assessment of our current security vulnerabilities, your recommendation for improvement, and your discretion. Those are all reasonable. And possibly one more thing," she said, and for the first time since he'd seen her, she looked not uncertain, that wasn't quite the word, but careful. Like someone deciding how much of the truth to say out loud. Though that last item is less professional in nature. "I'll hear it." She said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "My family has arranged a dinner for me on Saturday, with a man they believe would make a suitable match." Nathan kept his expression neutral. "I see. I need to be able to exit the situation if it becomes uncomfortable. You want an extraction plan, something almost like a smile. I want someone who can give me a credible reason to leave, a phone call from the base, some kind of official-sounding emergency, nothing that requires you to actually appear, just a voice on the phone, a cover story." Nathan looked at her for a moment. "Ms. Hale, you run a company with 4,000 employees. You could walk out of any dinner you wanted to and simply say you had a prior obligation." "Yes," she said. "I could. But you won't. My family has been trying to arrange this particular meeting for 8 months. If I cancel, it becomes complicated, emotionally complicated. I don't need complicated right now." He understood that more than he said. Emotionally complicated was a whole language he'd become fluent in without ever wanting to learn it. "I'll make the call," he said. "Thank you." "What's the code word?" She blinked. "Excuse me? If you want me to call you, need to give me a signal that tells me when, otherwise I'm guessing." What's the phrase you'll text me when you need the call made? She thought about it. Blue water. He nodded. Blue water. Got it. Saturday came. Nathan spent the morning at Emma's soccer game standing on the sideline in jeans and a jacket, watching his daughter chase a ball with the kind of absolute commitment that made him prouder than any commendation he'd ever received. Emma didn't score. Her team lost 4-2. She came off the field furious, cleats muddy ponytail destroyed, and said, "Their goalkeeper cheated." How did she cheat? She was too tall. It's a legitimate complaint. He bought her a hot chocolate from the concession stand and listened to her detailed breakdown of every call the referee had gotten wrong. She had opinions. She expressed them thoroughly. He drove her to his neighbor Mrs. Patterson's house, retired schoolteacher, warm, reliable Emma's unofficial grandmother, and made sure his daughter had everything she needed. "You going somewhere?" Emma asked, suddenly suspicious. "Work." "On a Saturday?" "The job doesn't always look at a calendar." Emma gave him a long look that contained considerably more wisdom than any 8-year-old had a right to. "You should get a normal job, Dad." "Probably." "Something where you're home for dinner." "Probably." "And where you don't have to carry a gun." "I'll put it on the list." She hugged him hard the way she always did, both arms locked around his waist, and then pulled back and went inside, already talking to Mrs. Patterson before the door finished opening. Nathan sat in his truck for a moment. He checked his phone. No message from Victoria. He drove home, changed into something that wasn't a uniform, and wasn't completely civilian. Either the Navy had made him permanently uncomfortable in clothes that meant nothing. He made dinner for himself, ate alone at the kitchen table, and answered 3 more emails from the base. At 8:14 p.m., his phone vibrated. The message read, "Blue water." He was already reaching for his jacket. Dimma. He didn't call. He'd intended to call. That was the plan. The phone call, the cover story, the official-sounding emergency that would give Victoria Hale a graceful exit from a dinner she hadn't wanted to attend. But something made him pause. The restaurant she'd texted him from was only 6 minutes away. He knew the place. Italian, mid-level expensive, the kind of spot where people went to be seen more than to enjoy the food. He'd driven past it twice during his initial assessment of the neighborhood around Hale Technologies headquarters. He looked at the text again. Blue water. 2 words. Quick. No punctuation. Victoria Hale, in his experience of 3 weeks, was a woman who used punctuation. Precisely. Every period in its correct place. No period. He got in the truck. He wasn't sure later how to explain what drove him there, instead of just making the call. Some combination of instinct and a low-grade alarm that had been running in the back of his trained mind since the message came in. The same alarm that had once told him a situation on a dock in Bahrain was wrong before he could identify why, and had been right. He drove the 6 minutes, parked, walked to the entrance. Through the glass front of the restaurant, he could see Victoria at a table near the window, composed back straight, the same unreadable expression she used in boardrooms, and across from her, a man in an expensive suit who was leaning forward in a way that was less attentive dinner companion and more closing a deal he hadn't been offered. Nathan went inside. He walked directly to the table. Didn't flag a host, didn't hesitate, didn't give himself time to second-guess what he was doing, because second-guessing was how situations deteriorated. The man looked up first. He had the kind of face that had been handsome for a long time, and knew it comfortable in its own confidence, unused to being interrupted. "Can I help you?" the man said. Nathan looked at Victoria. Victoria looked at Nathan. And then she did something he didn't expect. She exhaled. Just slightly. The tiniest release of tension, almost invisible, the kind you'd only catch if you'd spent 2 decades reading people in high-pressure situations. "Victoria," Nathan said, "I apologize for interrupting. There's a situation that requires your immediate attention." The man across the table, his name was Garrett. Nathan would learn later. Garrett Summers, who came from old money and worked for newer money and collected connections the way some people collected art, sat back in his chair. "She's in the middle of dinner." "I'm aware." Nathan didn't look at him when he said it, kept his eyes on Victoria. "I can give you 5 minutes to wrap up here if you need them, or we can go now." Victoria set her napkin on the table. She was already reaching for her purse. "Now is fine." "Victoria," Garrett started. "It was a pleasure, Garrett." She stood. Her voice was perfectly polite and completely final. "Thank you for dinner." She walked with Nathan toward the exit. Her pace was measured. Her spine was straight. She looked like a woman who had decided to leave a restaurant and meant it nothing more urgent than that. It was only when they pushed through the front door and the night air hit them that Nathan heard it. A breath released completely, this time the real one she'd been holding. They stood on the sidewalk. She didn't look at him right away. "You came yourself," she said. The call felt insufficient. "Why?" He thought about how to answer that. "You didn't use punctuation." She turned to look at him then, and for a moment in the light from the restaurant window and the street lamp above them, she looked younger, less armored, like a version of Victoria Hale that didn't have a board to answer to, or a company to run, or a family arranging dinners she didn't want. She looked like a person, just a person. "He spent 45 minutes talking about his portfolio," she said. "Not you. Definitely not me." A pause. "He asked me twice how my company's stock had performed this quarter. The second time, he'd already looked it up on his phone under the table. I could see the screen reflecting in his glasses." Nathan said nothing. "Some things didn't need commentary. My family thinks," Victoria began and then stopped. Started again. "My family believes that at some point, some specific point that everyone seems to understand except me, a woman in my position should prioritize building a certain kind of life. The right house, the right partner, the right appearances." She stopped again, looked down the empty sidewalk. "They found Garrett through a mutual friend who described him as established, as though I were applying for a loan." Nathan put his hands in his jacket pockets. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. You came." She glanced at him sideways. "That wasn't part of the arrangement." "No, it wasn't." "Why did you really come, Commander?" He'd been a commander for 11 years. He'd been Nathan for considerably longer, but fewer people use that name anymore. He thought about the question. The honest answer, the one he could actually put words to. Because the text didn't look right. Because I've spent my whole career paying attention to things that feel wrong before I can prove they are. And the other answer, the one that lived underneath that one and that he wasn't going to say out loud. Because something about the way you carry yourself tells me you spend a lot of time in rooms full of people who don't actually see you, and I didn't want you to be trapped in one on a Saturday night. "Professional instinct," he said. She watched him for a moment. "You're not a very good liar for a man in your line of work." "I'm an excellent liar in my line of work. I'm choosing not to right now." That almost smile again. The one she deployed rarely and apparently involuntarily, the one that changed her whole face. "Are you hungry?" she asked. He was. He'd eaten dinner alone 2 hours ago, and it hadn't been enough because it never was, because eating alone had a way of making food feel purely functional. "There's a diner 3 blocks east," he said. "Good coffee. Open late. No one will recognize you there." She looked at him like this answer surprised her, which told him something. She'd probably expected him to suggest somewhere with a reservation list and a sommelier. "Lead the way, Commander." "Nathan," he said. She blinked. "Off the clock," he said. "Nathan's fine." She was quiet for a beat. Then, "Victoria." They walked. The diner was called Max. It had been called Max since 1987, according to the sign above the door, and it looked exactly like a place that had been the same thing since 1987. Vinyl booths, laminated menus, a coffee machine that sounded like it was working very hard and resented the implication that it should work harder. They sat across from each other in a corner booth. The waitress, a woman named Donna, who had been working the Saturday night shift at Max for what appeared to be approximately forever, came over with a pot of coffee without being asked, and looked at them both with the particular evaluating gaze of someone who has seen every kind of couple, and former couple, and not yet couple, walk through a door. You two want a minute? Donna asked. Just the coffee, Victoria said. And do you have pie? Coconut cream and cherry. Cherry, please. Same, Nathan said. Coffee black. Donna went away. Victoria looked around at the diner, the other tables, the counter, the couple in the far booth arguing quietly about something neither of them seemed committed enough to actually resolve. And she looked like someone seeing something for the first time, even though it was just a diner. I haven't been somewhere like this in years, she said. Where do you usually eat? Wherever the meeting is. She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug when Donna brought it. Or at my desk, or in the car between things. A pause. I have a very good kitchen at home that I use primarily to store sparkling water. That's sad. Objectively, yes. She didn't seem bothered by the assessment. What about you? You cook. Emma requires it. She's 8 and she has opinions. Your daughter? Yeah. Donna brought the pie. Nathan ate his. Victoria ate 3 bites of hers and then seemed to realize she was actually enjoying it and ate the rest without overthinking it, which he suspected was unusual for her. What's she like? Victoria asked. Emma. No one asked him that. Not in the way Victoria just asked it, not as filler conversation, not as polite acknowledgement, but with actual interest, the kind that waited for a real answer. She's... He thought about Emma on the soccer sideline, fury in her eyes, cleats in the mud. Emma at the kitchen table explaining at length why the classification of Pluto was a governmental cover-up. Emma at the door of her room every morning, one eye still closed, already looking for a reason to negotiate. She's the most exhausting and the most extraordinary person I know. She wants to be a paleontologist. She thinks the referee at her soccer games has a personal vendetta against her. She keeps a list of questions to ask me at bedtime, specifically because she knows I can't say no to questions at bedtime. Victoria was watching him with an expression he couldn't immediately read. What? He asked. You love her so much it's visible, Victoria said. From the outside. It comes off you when you talk about her. He didn't know what to say to that. So he said nothing, which was usually his best option when emotion crept too close to the surface. Can I ask you something personal? Victoria said. You can ask. Emma's mother passed away 4 years ago, aneurysm. She was 34. Victoria was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry. There's no right thing to say to that. No, there isn't. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. Most people try anyway. They say she's in a better place, or that time heals, or that she would have wanted me to move on. All of which might be true, and none of which makes a Tuesday morning easier. What does... He thought about it. Emma asking me impossible questions at bedtime. Mrs. Patterson next door who pretends she's not watching out for us, but buys Emma books every 2 weeks and always has food when I forget to shop. The Navy, the routine of it. Structure when everything else feels like it's tilting. Do you want to still be in the Navy? Direct question. He respected that even when the answer was complicated. I want to be a good father, he said. The Navy and that goal are sometimes in tension. I make it work. I'll keep making it work until Emma's older, and I can figure out what making it work looks like when she doesn't need me in the same way. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. My father worked, she said, then slowly, like she was deciding how much of this to let out. He worked constantly. He believed that providing financially was the same as being present. My mother agreed with him, or at least she agreed out loud. She looked at her coffee. I grew up with everything I needed, and almost none of what I wanted. What did you want? She looked up. Someone to notice when I was unhappy. He held her gaze, didn't look away, didn't soften it into something more comfortable, just held it. For what it's worth, he said, you were unhappy at that table tonight. I noticed. She was very still for a moment. From the parking lot, he added, through the window. You were watching before you came in. Briefly, enough. Enough to know it wasn't just an uncomfortable dinner, she said slowly. Not a question. He wasn't interested in you. Nathan said. He was interested in the idea of being associated with you. There's a difference. It was visible. Victoria set her coffee cup down carefully. Most people don't say things like that to me. I noticed. Why do you... He considered the question. Because you clearly already know it. Saying it isn't telling you something new, it's just confirming that someone else sees it too. She looked at him for a long moment. Something moved in her expression that he couldn't fully name, something that wasn't the boardroom face, or the composed CEO, or the careful version of Victoria Hale that had walked out of the Italian restaurant with her back straight and her exit perfectly measured. Something that was just her. You know, she said finally. When I asked you for help this week, I expected efficient, professional, functional. I didn't expect... She gestured slightly toward the diner around them. Pie? This, she said. A conversation. Is that bad? She picked up her coffee again. No, it's unfamiliar. You've been running things for a long time, Nathan said. People who run things don't often get to just talk. Is that what we're doing? Just talking? What else would we be doing? She thought about that. I don't know. I haven't done it in a while. I'd forgotten it was an option. Yad. They stayed at Mac's Diner until close to midnight. It wasn't planned. There was no agenda, no objective, no outcome that either of them was managing toward. They just talked the way two people talk when they stop performing their respective roles and become briefly just themselves. Victoria told him about the early days of Hale Technologies. Not the Forbes version, not the TED Talk version, the real version. The version where she'd maxed out 2 credit cards and slept 4 hours a night and had been turned down for a small business loan 3 times before she found a path forward. She told him about the moment she realized the company was going to succeed, not a milestone, not a revenue figure, but a specific Tuesday afternoon when she looked at the people working in her office and understood that they were counting on her, and that changed everything. Nathan told her about his first command. A small vessel 12 crew, a routine patrol that had become not routine in the space of 40 minutes. He told her about the weight of other people's lives sitting in the palm of your hand, about what it does to you over time, not breaking you, not hardening you, but changing the way you understand what matters. You make every decision like it's the last one, she said. You make every decision like it needs to be explained to a board, he said. A pause. Then they both almost laughed at the same time, which was surprising enough that they both went quiet. We're not so different, Victoria said. In some ways. He shook his head slightly. In others, I know. She traced the edge of her coffee cup. Your world and mine. They don't generally overlap. And yet, here we are, in a booth at Mac's at 11:45 on a Saturday eating pie. She looked up. Here we are. He drove her to her car, which was still at the Italian restaurant. He waited until she was inside, and the engine turned over the old habit, the trained reflex make sure the person is safely inside before you leave. She lowered her window. Thank you, Nathan, she said. You're welcome, Victoria. She drove away. He sat in the parking lot for a moment longer than necessary. He told himself it was just the debrief habit, the way you always pause after an operation and make sure everything is accounted for. He told himself that was all it was. Then he drove home. Mrs. Patterson had left the porch light on. He went inside, checked on Emma asleep, one arm around a stuffed triceratops she'd owned since she was 3, and stood in the doorway of her room long enough to hear her breathing. Then he went to bed. He lay in the dark and thought about a woman eating cherry pie in a diner at midnight, and the way she'd looked when he said I noticed, and the single quiet exhale she'd released when she walked out of that restaurant door. He told himself it was nothing. He had a gift for telling himself things. Monday morning, he arrived at Hale Technologies at 7:55. Victoria was already there. She was always already there. He'd come to understand this was simply a law of her particular universe, the way gravity was a law of everyone else's. She was in the corridor outside his temporary office, holding 2 cups of coffee. She held one out as he approached. He stopped, looked at the cup, looked at her. "Don't read into it," she said without quite managing to make it sound casual. "You take it black," I remembered. He took the cup. "Thank you." She nodded professional correct, started to turn away. "Victoria." She turned back. "Emma's school has a science fair next Friday," he said. "She's presenting on prehistoric ocean ecosystems. She's been working on it for 3 weeks. She's going to be terrific." Victoria blinked. "Why are you telling me that?" He thought about the right answer. He came up with, "Because you asked what she was like. I thought you might want to know how it turns out." He went into his office. Behind him in the corridor, Victoria Hale stood holding her coffee cup. For the first time in a very long time, she was smiling. Fully. Not the almost smile, not the controlled professional acknowledgement, but a real one, unexpected and involuntary and directed at a closed door. She was smiling at a closed door. She was in trouble. She just didn't know it yet. The story continues. If you're watching from somewhere far away right now, drop your city in the comments. I want to see where this story reaches. And if no one's told you today, you found exactly the right place to be. The science fair was on a Friday. Nathan knew this because Emma had reminded him 11 times since Monday in 11 different ways, with 11 different levels of urgency. Monday, it was a casual mention over breakfast. By Wednesday, it had become a formal request that he confirm his attendance in writing, which she delivered on a sticky note she'd placed on his coffee mug before he was awake. By Thursday night, she was standing in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas at 9:30 p.m., holding her poster board and asking him to quiz her on the migration patterns of prehistoric mosasaurs. It's 9:30. Science doesn't sleep, Dad. You do. You're 8. I'm practically 9. You're 8 for 4 more months. She looked at him with an expression that suggested 4 months was a bureaucratic inconvenience she was working to resolve. Just ask me 3 questions, please. He asked her 5. She got everyone correct. He told her so and watched her stand a little taller in her dinosaur pajamas and felt the particular kind of pride that lived in your chest and had nowhere to go because the person who used to feel it with you wasn't there anymore. You're going to do great tomorrow, he said. What if the judges ask something I don't know? Tell them it's a fascinating area of ongoing research and you'd be happy to follow up with additional sources. Emma stared at him. That's just a fancy way of saying you don't know. It's the professional version of it. People use it in meetings all the time. She considered this with the gravity of someone filing away a survival skill. Okay, I'll use that. She hugged him hard the way she always did, like every hug might be the last one for a while, because sometimes it was because that was the specific tax the Navy collected on their family. Then she went to bed. Nathan stood in the kitchen for a moment after her door closed. He thought about Victoria. He'd been thinking about Victoria more than he intended to, which was a problem he was actively choosing not to examine too closely. At work, she was professional, precise, occasionally wry in a way that caught him off guard. She didn't reference Saturday night in any way that could be called significant. She brought him coffee twice more that week each time, with the same almost casual explanation. I was already getting mine. It was practical, and he accepted it the same way as something that didn't need to be named. But he'd noticed. He noticed the way you notice a current beneath calm water. Not dangerous, not dramatic, just present. Running under everything. He told himself it was nothing. He was getting a lot of mileage out of that particular story. Well, Friday morning arrived the way important mornings always do for children, too early and not early enough. Emma was up before her alarm, already dressed, hair actually brushed, without being asked. Poster board propped against the wall by the front door like a soldier waiting for deployment. You ate breakfast? Nathan asked. Toast and orange juice. Real orange juice or the powder? Dad. The powder doesn't count, Em. It was real, she said. And then, with slightly less conviction, mostly real, he drove her to school. She talked the entire way, not nervously, but with the particular focused energy of someone who has prepared thoroughly and is ready to show the work. He listened. He asked follow-up questions. He told her once, just once, that her mother would have loved seeing this, and Emma went quiet for exactly 3 seconds before saying, "I know. I think she helps me remember things when I'm studying." And Nathan had to focus very hard on the road ahead of him. He dropped her off. She ran toward the entrance, didn't look back. He sat in the truck. His phone buzzed. A text from Victoria. "Good luck to Emma today." He stared at it for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. Then he texted back, "She won't need it. But thank you." 3 dots appeared. Then, "No. I don't imagine she will." He drove to the base, handled 2 hours of administrative work that required his attention, cleared it, and drove back to the school for the afternoon exhibition. He was there early. He stood in the gymnasium with the other parents, most of whom were in pairs. The ordinary configuration of a life he'd stepped sideways out of 4 years ago, and he found Emma stationed near the far wall. She was talking to a judge, confident, clear. Her hands moved when she got to the part about ocean temperature changes during the Cretaceous period. The judge was nodding writing notes, and Nathan could see from 20 feet away that Emma was killing it. He pulled out his phone and took a photo. He sent it to Victoria without entirely planning to. Her response came 40 seconds later. "She looks exactly like someone who knows she's right." He smiled at his phone like an idiot in the middle of a school gymnasium. A woman beside him, another parent friendly, slightly apologetic about the interruption, said, "Which one's yours?" "The one explaining prehistoric oceans to the guy with the clipboard." The woman looked back at him. "She's going to win." "Yeah," Nathan said. "I know." Emma won second place, which she accepted graciously in public and complained about for the entire drive home, because the first place project was a model of the solar system that Emma considered conceptually unambitious and not even about something extinct. Nathan listened to the full debrief, the complete analysis of the judging criteria, and Emma's detailed proposal for a formal appeal process. "There's no appeal process for school science fairs," he said. "There should be. I'll write a letter." "To whom?" She thought about it. "NASA. They care about science." "Emma." "What?" He glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Second place ribbon pinned to her shirt, indignant and bright-eyed, and completely entirely herself. "You were extraordinary today." She stopped mid-argument. Something softened in her face just for a moment before the 8-year-old armor went back up. Yeah. She looked out the window. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay." The following Tuesday, Nathan was reviewing a security protocol document in his temporary office at Hale Technologies when Victoria appeared in the doorway. She didn't knock. She almost never knocked, not out of rudeness, but because she moved through her own building with the instinctive ownership of someone who had built it from nothing and knew every square foot of it. "I need your opinion on something," she said. Professional or personal. She came in and sat across from him, which she'd never done before in his office previously when she needed him. It was always a corridor conversation or the conference room. Professional technically, but personal in the way all professional decisions eventually become personal. He set the document down. "Go ahead. I've been approached by a federal contractor, one of our government partners, about expanding our data security operations into a classified branch. New division significant staffing increase contracts that would take us from mid-tier to something considerably larger." She said it the way people say things they've been sitting with too long. "It's everything I've been building toward for 6 years." "But," Nathan said. She looked at him. "Is there an obvious but?" There's always a but when someone tells you what they've built toward for 6 years, and their voice sounds like that. She was quiet for a moment. "The timeline requires me to be in Washington 3 weeks out of every month for the first year. Minimum. possibly longer. She pressed her lips together briefly. I have department heads I trust. I have systems. Logistically, it's manageable. What's not manageable? She looked at her hands, which were folded on the table. Controlled still the same way she held herself when something was harder than she was going to let it look. I built this company here. The people here they know me. Not the resume, not the profile, but me. The version of me that exists when I'm not performing for an audience. She paused. I'm not sure I know how to build that somewhere else. Nathan leaned back in his chair. Can I ask you something that might sound like it's outside my lane? You never stay in your lane, I've noticed. Why are you telling me this? She met his eyes. Because you give honest answers. Most people can give you honest answers about a business decision. Most people also want something from me. Investors want returns. My board wants stability. My department heads want job security. My family wants... She stopped. Everyone who knows me well enough to have an opinion has a reason to want a particular outcome. A pause. You don't. I work for the Navy. I have no stake in your expansion strategy. Exactly. She looked at him steadily. So tell me what you actually think. He thought about it. Not the business calculus she had people for, that people smarter than him about balance sheets and market positioning. He thought about what she'd actually said and what was underneath it. I think, he said carefully, that you already know what you want to do. And I think you're sitting in my office because you're hoping someone will tell you it's okay to want the thing that doesn't look like the obvious right answer. Victoria was very still. The expansion makes strategic sense, he continued. On paper, it's the move. But you're not asking me about the paper version. You're asking about the other version where you leave something behind that you can't fully name yet. She looked away. Out the window behind him, then back. When did you get your first command? The pivot surprised him, but he followed it. 11 years ago. Were you ready? No. Did you know you weren't ready? Yes. But you took it anyway. The mission required someone in that chair. I was the best available option at the time. He paused. Also, refusing wasn't actually on the table. What if it had been? He considered it honestly. I don't know. I might have said I needed more time, which would have been true and also would have been fear-talking. He looked at her. Being ready and being willing to go anyway are two different things. The Navy taught me that. Also, that the person who waits until they're fully ready is usually waiting in the same place 10 years later, still not ready, wondering where the time went. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. The kind of quiet that meant something was settling. I hate that you make sense, she said finally. I've been told that, usually by Emma. That broke it, not the topic, but the weight of it slightly. She almost smiled. What does Emma think you should do with your career? Get a normal job, come home for dinner, stop carrying a gun. She's not wrong. She's 8. She's never wrong. He picked up the protocol document again, which was the professional signal that the conversation was moving toward closure. The Washington offer. Whatever you decide, you'll build it the same way you built this, because that's what you do. You sound certain about that. I've seen the way you run a room, he said. You're certain about everything else. You can afford to be uncertain about this one. She stood up, smoothed her jacket, the small physical reset she did when she was re-armoring after allowing something through. She walked to the door. Nathan? He looked up. Emma's second-place ribbon, she said. You have a photo of it on your desk. You framed it. He glanced at the small frame beside his laptop. He had in fact framed it. He'd printed the photo from his phone and put it in a $2 frame from the drugstore on the drive back from the school. He hadn't thought about whether anyone would notice. She was furious about second place, he said. I know, you told me. Victoria looked at the frame for a moment. But you framed it anyway. The ribbon's not for what she didn't win. It's for who she was in that room. Victoria looked at him for a beat too long. Then she nodded once and walked out. He looked at the frame. He thought about the expression on her face when she'd seen it. He could not entirely explain why that expression stayed with him for the rest of the afternoon, like a song he couldn't locate the source of. Flag. 2 weeks passed. The assignment continued. The work was real. Nathan had identified 3 significant vulnerabilities in Hale Technologies' physical security infrastructure. Written detailed remediation plans, coordinated with her IT director on protocol upgrades. Victoria reviewed everything he produced with the same focused attention she brought to everything, and when she had questions, they were always precise and always revealed that she understood the material better than most people he'd briefed at twice her pay grade. Professionally, it was one of the cleaner assignments he'd had. Personally, it was becoming harder to think of as just an assignment. He didn't act on it. He was too old and too experienced, and had too many reasons not to confuse professional respect and proximity for anything more significant. He told himself this regularly. He was very good at maintenance, at keeping the structure sound, at not allowing things to shift beneath him. What he was less good at was accounting for Emma. It started small. He had mentioned Victoria in passing once. The CEO I'm working with says, and Emma had locked onto the name with the precision of a heat-seeking missile and filed it away. The following week, when Nathan mentioned that Victoria had won a business award that was being written up in a trade magazine, Emma had said very casually, "She sounds smart." She is. Like smart or like book smart? Both, I think. Emma had nodded slowly, the way she nodded when she was processing information she intended to return to. Nathan had recognized the expression, and known with the resigned certainty of a man who had been outmaneuvered by an 8-year-old before that this was not the last conversation they would have on the subject. He was right. The following Saturday, Emma was sitting at the kitchen table working on a school reading assignment when she said without looking up, "Does Victoria like dinosaurs?" Nathan set down the dish he was drying. "I haven't asked." "You should ask." "Why?" "Because it's a good way to find out what kind of person someone is." She turned a page. "If they say no, they don't really get things." That's a significant philosophical claim about dinosaurs. They were here for 165 million years, Dad. We've been here for like 300,000. Some respect is warranted. He put the dish away. "I'll pass it along." Emma looked up, then sharp-eyed direct, so much like her mother, when her mother had been deciding whether to say the thing she was actually thinking. "Do you like her?" Nathan kept his voice even. "She's a good professional contact and He paused. "She's a decent person." Emma watched him. "That took you a long time to say." "I was choosing words." She looked back at her book. "Mrs. Patterson says when people take a long time to say simple things, it's because the answer is more complicated than the words." Mrs. Patterson is a retired school teacher, not a therapist. She's also right about most things. Another page turn. "Just saying." He did not respond to this because there was no response that wouldn't give Emma more ammunition, and she already had enough. It was a Thursday evening, 3 weeks after the science fair, when everything shifted. Nathan was working late, a report that needed to be finished before he left for the weekend, and most of the Hale Technologies floor had emptied out. The cleaning crew had been through. The lights in the outer office were on their automatic dimming cycle. The building had the specific quiet of a place that housed ordinary human industry during ordinary hours, and became something else after them. He heard her before he saw her. Footsteps in the corridor, a pause outside his door, and then Victoria appeared in the doorway looking wrong. Not disheveled. Victoria Hale was constitutionally incapable of appearing disheveled. But there was something off in her posture, a tightness around her eyes that he'd learned to read over the past weeks as the indicator that something had hit harder than she was planning to show. "You're still here," she said. "Report's due tomorrow. You're still here." "I live here." She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, and she looked at him with the slightly unfocused gaze of someone who has been in their own head for too long and is relieved to find an exit. "Can I interrupt you?" "You already are. Come in." She sat in the chair across from his desk, the chair she'd claimed as hers, in the unspoken way that territory gets claimed. She didn't say anything immediately. He waited because he'd learned that Victoria Hale, on her way to saying something difficult, needed the silence more than she needed prompting. "My brother called this afternoon," she said. He waited. "He's been handling our family's financial interests for the last 12 years. Investments, properties, some business holdings." She pressed her fingers briefly against her temple. "He's made some decisions over the last year that have created some complications. Some of these complications involve Hale Technologies indirectly in a way that's going to require disclosure and some amount of legal maneuvering." How serious? Not serious enough to be a scandal. Serious enough to be a headache. The kind that requires lawyers and careful communication and an uncomfortable board meeting where I explained something I was not informed about and had no part in. She looked at the ceiling briefly. "He didn't tell me because he didn't think it would matter. He thought he was managing it. And he wasn't. He was not." Her voice was tight. Not angry exactly, something more controlled, and therefore more volatile than simple anger. "My brother is a good person who makes poor decisions and then treats them as someone else's emergency to clean up. This is a pattern I've been managing for 15 years. You're angry. I'm furious." She said it flatly, like an admission more than an outburst. "I'm also—" She stopped. Started again. "I'm tired of being the person in this family who holds things together. I'm tired of being capable. I'm tired of the specific exhaustion of being the one people call when they've made a mess because they know I'll fix it." Nathan said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "That's not a business problem." "No, it's not. You've been managing your family the same way you manage your company." She looked at him. "Same instinct," he said. "Identify the vulnerability. Contain the damage. Stabilize the situation. Move forward." He held her gaze. "The only problem is that your company doesn't love you, so it can't take advantage of that. Your family does, so it can." Victoria exhaled. Not the tiny, controlled exhale of someone managing a reaction. The full one, the real one. The kind that carries weight when it leaves. "How do you do that?" she asked. "Do what?" "Say the exact thing." "I pay attention." She looked at him for a long moment. "Nathan." She said his name with a deliberateness that made him feel it land differently than names usually did. "Can I ask you something that has nothing to do with any of this?" "Go ahead." "When you lost your wife," she said, and stopped like she was making sure each word was the right one. "When that happened, how long did it take before you let anyone help you?" The question sat between them. He thought about it honestly. The first year, the one he barely remembered, the one that existed in his memory as a series of functional moments without emotional connection. Mrs. Patterson's casseroles that he ate mechanically because food was fuel and fuel was required to keep Emma alive. Captain Whitfield telling him to take leave, and him refusing because being at sea was easier than being at home, where everything was the shape of what was missing. The base therapist. The conversations he'd half participated in and then left unchanged. "Too long," he said. "Longer than was good for Emma. Longer than was good for me." He paused. "I convinced myself that accepting help was the same as admitting I couldn't handle it, which was wrong." "Wrong," he confirmed. It was pride dressed up as responsibility. Victoria was watching him with the focused attention she gave things she was trying to understand completely. "You're allowed to need the help," he said. "That's not weakness. That's not—" "I know," she said. "Intellectually, I know." She uncrossed her arms, leaned forward slightly. "But knowing and believing are not the same thing." "No, they're not. How do you get from one to the other?" He thought about Emma and the bedtime questions. About Mrs. Patterson's casseroles. About the specific evening 2 years after Sarah died when he'd sat on the kitchen floor at 2 a.m. and cried for the first time since the funeral, and how afterward he'd felt something shift, not better, not fixed, but less like he was carrying the weight directly against his skin. "You let something in," he said. "Something small at first. You let someone help with one thing, and the world doesn't end, and you let them help with something else, and eventually you realize the walls were never actually protecting you. They were just keeping everything out, including the things that could help." Victoria held his gaze for a beat. That sounds like experience? It is. Was there a specific thing, a specific someone who helped? He thought about Emma's face in the doorway every morning, about Mrs. Patterson's porch light, about the first Saturday after Sarah died when he'd managed to make Emma breakfast, real breakfast eggs and toast, nothing out of a box, and she'd eaten it and said, "Thanks, Daddy." And he'd understood somehow that this was the thing that was going to hold him together. This small, daily necessary thing. "My daughter," he said. "My daughter helped me. She needed me, so I had to be functional." And being functional eventually became something else. Something closer to actually living. Victoria was quiet for a long time. "I don't have that," she said. "I don't have someone who needs me in that way. In the way where needing is clear and unconditional." She looked at her hands. "Everyone who needs me needs something I can provide professionally or financially. It's a different kind of need. It's transactional." "Yes." "That doesn't have to be permanent," he said. She looked up. "People build things," he said. "Not just companies, the other kind of things. It doesn't have a strategic timeline. It doesn't have a board approval process. It just happens if you let it." Something moved in her expression. He saw it and did not look away, and also did not follow it where it wanted to go, because following it would mean crossing a line he'd drawn carefully, and for reasons that were still valid, even if they felt less conclusive in this particular moment than they had when he'd drawn them. "It's late," he said. "It is." She didn't move immediately. "Nathan?" "Yeah." "Thank you for—" She gestured slightly. All of this. I don't know what I thought the Navy was sending me when my CO arranged this assignment, but it wasn't a decent conversation partner. Someone who treats me like a person," she said, "rather than an entity to manage or a resource to utilize." She stood up. "That's rarer than it should be." He stood too, the way he always did, the ingrained courtesy, the physical signal of respect that the Navy had drilled into him so deep it happened before thought. "Go home, Victoria," he said. "Get some sleep. Your brother's mess will still be there tomorrow, and you'll be sharper when you've rested." Spoken like someone who functions on 4 hours and pretends it's fine. "Do as I say." She almost smiled. Almost. "Good night, Nathan." "Good night." She left. He stood in the empty office for a moment. He turned off his laptop. He gathered his jacket. He walked through the quiet building to the elevator, through the lobby, out into the night air. His phone buzzed. "Victoria, for what it's worth, Emma's going to be a great paleontologist." He stopped walking. He typed back, "She's going to be a great everything. 3 dots. Then, yeah, she is." He stood on the sidewalk outside the building. He thought about walls and what they actually kept out and what they kept in. He thought about the specific weight of trying to be 2 things at once, a soldier and a father, a professional, and a person, and how you sometimes couldn't feel one without the other bleeding through. He thought about Victoria saying, "Someone who treats me like a person." He thought about the expression on her face when she'd seen the framed photo of Emma's ribbon. The full exhale outside the restaurant. The way she said his name in the corridor, deliberate and careful, like she was making sure she had the right to use it. He thought about all of this, and he knew with the same clear-eyed certainty that had served him across 22 years of service that he was in more complicated territory than he had intended to enter. He also knew with the same honesty that had made him a good officer and a difficult patient, and occasionally an inconvenient friend, that he had walked into it willingly. Step by step, coffee by coffee, pie at midnight, and framed ribbons, and late-night conversations in an empty office while the rest of the building slept. He had walked in. And for the first time since he'd been assigned to Hale Technologies, he wasn't entirely sure he wanted to find his way back out. He drove home. He checked on Emma. He stood in the doorway of her room and listened to her breathe. Then he went to bed, and for the first time in longer than he could accurately calculate, it took him a while to fall asleep. Not because of the job, not because of the next deployment that was already scheduled on the calendar. Not because of the endless weight of everything he carried, but because of a woman in an empty office who had looked at him like he was something she'd been searching for without quite knowing the name of what she was looking for. And because he was starting quietly and against his better judgment to feel the same way. The deployment orders came on a Wednesday morning, and Nathan found out about them the way he found out about most things that were going to significantly disrupt his life matter-of-factly, in writing with a timeline that left no room for argument. Captain Whitfield called him at 7:20 a.m., which meant it was serious because Whitfield did not make phone calls before 8 o'clock unless the situation required it. Reed. Ma'am, your assignment at Hale Technologies concludes at the end of next week. I need you back on base by the 15th for pre-deployment briefings. We're looking at departure the 22nd. Nathan stood in the kitchen with his coffee cup and processed this. Emma was still in her room. The house was quiet. How long? He asked. 8 to 12 weeks, possibly extended depending on how the situation develops. Understood. How's the Hale assignment wrapping? Final report will be complete by Friday. All remediation recommendations documented and transferred to their IT director. Clean handoff. Good. A pause which from Whitfield was meaningful. She was not a woman who paused without reason. Reed, how are you? Fine, ma'am. That's not what I asked. He looked out the window. I'll be ready by the 15th. Another pause. Your neighbor Patterson, she's available for Emma. She always is. All right. He could hear her deciding whether to say the next thing. She said it. You've done good work over there, Nathan. Whatever comes next, you've done good work. She hung up. He stood there with his coffee going cold, and the weight of the timeline sitting across his shoulders like something he'd carried so many times he knew exactly where it settled, knew exactly how to adjust his posture to bear it, knew that knowing how to carry it didn't make it lighter. Emma came out of her room at 7:45, hair sideways, one sock on, looking for her backpack with the focused intensity of someone who is absolutely certain they left it somewhere reasonable. Dad, have you seen my... By the front door. I moved it last night because you left it in the middle of the hallway, and I nearly stepped on it at 5 a.m. Oh. She retrieved it, checked the contents with professional thoroughness. Are we out of the apple juice boxes? I'll get more today. She looked at him. The same look she'd inherited from her mother, the one that saw straight through whatever surface he was presenting and went directly to the thing underneath. What's wrong? She asked. Nothing's wrong. Eat something before school. Dad? Emma. She stood there in one sock and her future paleontologist shirt and looked at him with 8-year-old eyes that held considerably more than 8 years of understanding, and he made a decision that he always made and always found difficult, which was to be honest with her. I got deployment orders this morning, he said. I leave in about 2.5 weeks. Emma was quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car passed on the street. How long? She asked. Her voice was steady. She'd learned steady from him, which was one of the things he was proudest of and most heartbroken by simultaneously. 8 to 12 weeks, maybe longer. She nodded. Okay. I said okay, Dad. She went to the cabinet and got a granola bar. She put her second sock on. She picked up her backpack. She came to him and hugged him around the waist the way she always did, arms locked cheek against his chest. He put his hand on the back of her head. Mrs. Patterson knows, she asked, muffled against his shirt. I'll tell her today. Will you call like regularly? Every chance I get. Promise. Promise. She let go, shouldered her backpack, looked up at him with her mother's eyes. Okay, she said again, and this time it meant something different. Not simple acceptance, but the kind of okay that carries everything unsaid inside it all. The missing and the waiting and the love that has learned to live alongside absence because it doesn't have another option. He drove her to school. She ran in without looking back. He sat in the truck for longer than usual. And he told Victoria on Thursday. He'd been deciding how to tell her since Wednesday morning, which was itself information he'd been avoiding analyzing too closely. The professional version of this conversation was simple. His assignment was concluding as scheduled. The transition was handled. The relationship between Commander Nathan Reed and Hale Technologies was ending in an orderly fashion with all deliverables complete, clean, functional, appropriate. But it didn't feel clean, and it didn't feel like the whole of what needed to be said. He found her in the small conference room she used for individual meetings, the one with the window that faced east, the one she'd told him once she preferred, because the morning light came in at an angle that didn't hit her screen. He knocked this time because she'd told him once that she found it easier to be interrupted when she saw it coming, and he was trying to do this correctly, even though he wasn't entirely sure what correctly looked like from where he was standing. She looked up, read something in his face immediately the way she'd gotten better at reading him over the past weeks. "Come in." He came in. He sat down across from her. He didn't soften it or build up to it because she didn't respect being managed, and he wasn't going to start now. "I got deployment orders. I leave in about 2 weeks. My assignment here wraps by the end of next week." Victoria looked at him. She set her pen down carefully the way she set things down when she needed her hands to be still. "I can't say specifically." "How long?" 8 to 12 weeks, possibly more." She nodded. Her expression was controlled. The boardroom face, the one that processed difficult information without exporting the difficulty to the room around it. He knew that face well enough now to see the slight shift beneath it, the thing she was deciding how much to let through. "Is it dangerous?" she asked. "Most of what I do carries some risk." "That's not a no." "No," he said, "it's not." She looked at the table for a moment. "Is Emma? She'll be with Mrs. Patterson. She's done this before. She's a remarkable kid." "She is." Victoria's voice was quiet. "She gets that from somewhere." He didn't answer that. "The security transition is complete?" Victoria asked, and the shift back to professional ground was deliberate. He could feel her choosing it, reaching for it the way you reach for something solid when the footing under you changes. "Final reports ready. I'll brief your IT director and head of physical security tomorrow morning. Everything they need is documented." He paused. "Hale Technologies will be in good shape." "I know it will." She looked at him directly. "That's not what I'm thinking about right now." He held her gaze. "Victoria, don't." She said it quietly, not sharply. "Don't manage this. You do that sometimes. You find the professional framing, and you step into it because it's easier than the other framing. I've watched you do it for weeks." He was quiet for a moment. "That's accurate. So don't do it right now." He leaned forward, arms on the table. "What do you want me to say? What you're actually thinking?" He thought about what he was actually thinking. About 2 weeks and 12 weeks, and the deployment calendar that had structured his entire adult life, and what it meant that for the first time in as long as he could remember, the calendar felt like a weight rather than just a fact. "I'm thinking," he said slowly, "that this assignment has been different from what I expected." "In what way?" "In every way that matters." He watched her face. "In the ways that are going to make leaving harder than it should be professionally." She held very still. "Harder how?" This was the moment. He knew it. He'd known it was coming for a week. Maybe longer, had felt it building the way pressure builds before weather changes. Not sudden but inevitable, arriving exactly when the conditions were right. He made a choice. "I'm not going to do this to you," he said. She blinked. "I'm sorry. I'm not going to tell you the thing that's true, and then get on a plane in 2 weeks and leave you with it. That's not fair to you, and you deserve better than someone who drops something on you right before he disappears for 3 months." Victoria stared at him. "Nathan, you just told me there's something true, and then told me you weren't going to say it. I know. That's considerably worse than saying nothing. I know that too." He held her gaze. "But I can't pretend the thing doesn't exist. I can't stand here and give you the professional handoff and shake your hand and act like this was just an assignment and none of the rest of it happened. I can't do that either. She was quiet for a long moment. Something was moving in her expression. Not anger, not exactly hurt, something more layered than either. Something that looked, if he was reading it right, like recognition. Like she'd been waiting for this sentence and dreading it in equal measure. "So what are you doing?" she asked. "Telling you the truth without giving you something I can't follow through on right now." "You could follow through." "I'm leaving in 2 weeks." "People leave and come back, Nathan. That's not—" "My wife left," he said and stopped. The word fell into the room differently than he'd intended. Not as deflection, not as armoring, just as the thing that was true underneath the other things, the specific weight that hadn't moved from his chest in 4 years, regardless of what he'd built around it. Victoria looked at him with the care of someone handling something she knew was fragile. "I know that," she said softly. "I'm not saying it as an excuse. I'm saying it because when I think about allowing something—" He stopped, gathered the words more carefully. "I've been keeping things in order for 4 years. Emma, the job, the house, Mrs. Patterson's porch light. I've been maintaining the structure because the structure is what's kept us intact." He looked at her. The idea of reaching for something and then getting on a plane? "You're afraid." "I'm realistic, Nathan." She said his name with a gentleness he hadn't heard from her before, the register she used for things she was being very careful with. Being realistic is how you maintain the structure. Being afraid is what's driving this conversation. He didn't argue with that because he couldn't. "I'm not asking you for anything," she said. "I want to be clear about that. I'm not—" She paused, chose the next words with precision. "I'm not trying to put something in your path before you go. That's not what this is." "What is it?" She looked at him for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was steady and quiet and entirely honest in a way that cost her something to produce. "It's me telling you that whatever this has been these weeks, the diner, the conversations, the coffee, the photo of Emma's ribbon that you framed, whatever this has been, it has mattered to me. Not as a professional contact, not as an interesting interaction, as the thing it actually was." She held his gaze. "And I'm not asking you to do anything about that. I just need you to know it because you're leaving, and I'd rather you knew than didn't." He sat across from her and felt something in his chest expand past the dimensions he'd gotten comfortable with it occupying. "Victoria, you should go finish the transition documentation," she said, and her voice had shifted slightly, a small recalibration towards something more composed. "You have a lot to hand off before Friday." "I do." "And Emma probably needs you home tonight." "She does." He stood. She stood. They were on opposite sides of the table in a conference room in a building she'd built, and he'd spent 10 weeks learning the vulnerabilities of, and the distance between them was approximately 6 feet, and felt like something considerably more complex than that. "For what it's worth," he said, "I know what it is too." She looked at him. "Whatever this has been, I know what it is too." He walked out. He drove home in the particular silence that follows, saying something important, and then walking away from it, which is different from ordinary silence. The way that a room someone has just left is different from a room no one has been in. Emma was at Mrs. Patterson's. He texted to say he was home. Changed out of his work clothes, stood in the kitchen for a while, not doing anything specific, and then called his sister Linda in Baltimore, because Linda was the only person in his life who could be counted on to say exactly what she thought without structuring it for his comfort. "She sounds remarkable," Linda said after he'd told her not everything, not the way he'd told it to himself in the truck, but enough. "She is. And you're leaving in 2 weeks." "Yes." "And you told her you knew what it was but didn't say what it was." "That's correct." A pause. "Nathan, I say this with love and a full awareness of your many fine qualities. That is the most profoundly foolish thing you have done in recent memory. I didn't want to. What be honest, be available. Allow something good to exist in your life without immediately finding a reason to contain it in a box labeled logistically complicated. Linda, you have been in a box labeled logistically complicated for 4 years. You and Emma, both of you, in a very neat and functional and completely sealed box. And this woman, who from what you're telling me is extraordinary, and sees you and treats your daughter like a person worth knowing, has apparently found a gap in the box, and you are standing there with tape." He was quiet. "Nathan? I hear you. Do you? Because I want to say one more thing, and then I'll stop." "Go ahead." "Sarah would not want the box," Linda said. "You know that. You've always known that. The box was never for Sarah. The box was for you because grief is easier to manage when you build a container for it and decide the container is the same as being fine." A beat. "You are not fine. You are functional, which you are very good at, but functional and fine are different things. And I think Victoria Hale might be one of the first people since Sarah who has made you feel the difference." He stood in the kitchen and looked at the framed photo of Emma's ribbon on his desk through the open door of the office. "I leave in 2 weeks, he said. "People come back, Nathan." He closed his eyes. "They come back," Linda said again gently. "And some things wait." The next week had a shape to it, the specific compressed intensity of a timeline that everyone can see the edge of. Nathan finished the transition documentation. He briefed Victoria's team. He coordinated with Mrs. Patterson, updated Emma's school about his deployment, arranged the power of attorney and emergency contact protocols. He updated every time he left. He did everything a man who has deployed a dozen times knows how to do in the time before departure. And through all of it, he saw Victoria every day. They didn't reference what had been said in the conference room. They didn't revisit it, or expand it, or name it more precisely than it had already been named. But the air between them had changed in the way air changes when something has been acknowledged, lighter in some ways, heavier in others, more honest in the specific way that honesty makes things both simpler and more complicated at the same time. She came to his office on the Tuesday of his last week, knocked, came in, set a coffee on his desk, black no commentary, and then sat down in her chair and said, "Emma's birthday is coming up." He looked up. "How do you know that?" "You mentioned it in passing 3 weeks ago. You said she'd be 9 in the spring and that she wanted a telescope because she'd conquered dinosaurs and was ready to move on to the universe." He had said that. He remembered saying it. He hadn't thought she'd remember. "It's the 6th, he said. "I'll be deployed." Victoria nodded. "Will you be able to call?" "I'll do everything possible." She was quiet for a moment. "I'd like to, if it's all right with you. I'd like to do something for her, while you're gone. Not as a replacement for you being there, nothing like that. Just she shouldn't have a birthday pass without something that feels like someone planned it." Nathan looked at her. "Victoria, you run a company." "I'm aware." "You don't need to." "I want to," she said, and the simplicity of it stopped him. Not an obligation, not a professional courtesy, not the transactional need fulfillment she'd described people offering her. Just want, plain and clear. "She's a good kid, Nathan. She deserves a birthday. And Mrs. Patterson is wonderful, but she's also 73, and the kind of birthday a 9-year-old who has just conquered dinosaurs deserves probably requires someone with more energy. I was going to say enthusiasm, but energy works too." She held his gaze. "Let me do this. Tell Mrs. Patterson to include me. That's all I'm asking." He thought about Emma's face when he told her he was deploying. The steady voice, the 2-second quiet, the hug that locked around him like she was memorizing it. "She'll talk your ear off about mosasaurs," he said. "I'm counting on it. She'll also have opinions about everything." Clearly inherited. He almost smiled. "Okay." He paused. "Thank you." "You don't need to thank me." "I know. I'm doing it anyway." She stood up, smoothed her jacket. The armoring motion, except this time it felt different, less like putting walls up, and more like steadying herself before saying the next thing. "Nathan?" she said. "Yeah." "I've been thinking about what you said. In the conference room." She didn't look away. "About knowing what it is." He said nothing. Waited. I think you were right not to say more than that, before you leave." She said it like someone who has arrived at a conclusion through careful and honest work. Not because what's true isn't true, but because you're right that I deserve better than having something handed to me right before someone disappears for 3 months. A pause. But I want you to know that I'll be here. When you come back, whatever that means, whatever shape it takes, I'll be here. He stood up. The gap between professional and everything else closed to almost nothing, and he held it there on the right side of the line, because some things are worth holding carefully. I'll come back, he said. I know you will. I always come back. I know that too. She picked up her coffee cup from his desk. She'd left it there when she gave him his. He realized had come in without her own and given him his anyway. But it's different this time. Yeah, he said. It is. She left. He sat back down in his chair and looked at the wall and understood with the clear-eyed certainty he trusted more than most things that he was in love with Victoria Hale. Had been probably since the diner. Since the way she'd wrapped both hands around the coffee mug and looked around the place like she was seeing something she'd forgotten the world contained. Since she'd asked him what Emma was like and actually waited for the real answer. He understood it, and he wrote it down in the back of his mind, in the place where he kept the things that were true and important and required him to come home. And he put the deployment on top of it, like a weight on a seed. The way weight sometimes helps things grow, and he went back to work. His last day at Hale Technologies was a Friday. He completed the final handoff meeting at 2 in the afternoon. Shook hands with the IT director, with the head of physical security, with the 2 department heads he'd coordinated with most closely. They thanked him. He was professional and warm, and exactly what a departing consultant is supposed to be. At 3:30, he went to say goodbye to Victoria. She was on a call when he appeared in the doorway of her office, her real office. This time, not the conference room, the one with the wall of east-facing windows, and the single personal item on her desk. A small framed photograph he'd never been close enough to identify. She held up one finger 1 minute, and he waited in the doorway and watched her finish the call with the precise economy of someone who respects other people's time by ending conversations exactly when they're over and not a second later. She hung up, looked at him. "Handoff's complete," he said. "You're in good hands." "I know." She stood. Came around the desk, not toward the door, but toward him, closing the professional distance down to something more honest. She held out her hand. He took it. Her handshake was firm, the way it always was, the way it had been the first time he'd met her in the glass-walled conference room on the 14th floor, when she'd stepped out of a meeting and studied him for 2 seconds, and said, "Walk with me." But she held on a beat longer than a handshake required, and he let her, and in that moment, they were 2 people standing in a doorway, saying goodbye in the only language they'd allowed themselves so far. "Take care of yourself over there," she said. "Always do. Take care of Emma. She'll be fine. She's tougher than both of us." "Probably." She released his hand. "Nathan." "Yeah." "Come back whole," she said. "That's all I want. Just come back whole." He looked at her. "I will." He left. He walked through the building he'd spent 10 weeks learning the vulnerabilities of, through the lobby, where the security guard he'd trained on the new protocols nodded at him through the glass doors, and into the afternoon. He drove to Emma's school to pick her up. She came out of the building at 3:50 and saw the truck and ran. Not her usual run, this was the flat-out backpack-bouncing full-commitment sprint of a child who knows time is running short and is maximizing every remaining minute of it. She hit the truck door and yanked it open and climbed in and turned to him with her cheeks flushed and her eyes bright and her hair escaping its ponytail in 4 separate directions. "Dad," she said breathlessly. "Dad, my teacher said my project on the Cretaceous Ocean was the most comprehensive student report she's seen in 14 years of teaching. 14 years. He drove. I'm not surprised. She said it in front of the whole class. Good, the whole class should know. Tommy Reyes said it was nerdy. She considered this. I told him that nerd was a word people used when they didn't have a better argument. Emma. What? It's true. Where did you hear that? She gave him a sidelong look. You. You said it about someone at the base when you were on the phone and thought I was asleep. He drove in silence for a moment. You should be asleep when I think you're asleep. I'm a light sleeper. It's genetic. He pulled up to the house. Emma jumped out, got halfway to the door, and then stopped and turned around. He was getting out of the truck. She was looking at him with the direct, undefended look that sometimes broke his heart a little with its honesty. "Dad," she said, "can we have dinner together every night until you leave, even if it's just cereal?" He stopped. She kept going the way she did when she was being brave about something. Like, can we just be home together, every night? Even if you have stuff to do, can you do it after I'm in bed? I want to know you were there for dinner. Every night. He crossed the yard and pulled her in right there in the driveway. One hand on her head, the other arm around her shoulders, and she hugged him, the way she always hugged him, locked, committed both arms, like she meant every square inch of it. "Every night," he said. "I promise. Even if it's cereal," she said into his jacket. "Even if it's cereal." The night before he deployed, Emma stayed up until 9:30, which he allowed, because there were rules, and then there were rules, and bedtime when your dad was leaving tomorrow was not the same category as ordinary bedtime. They ate cereal, as promised, 2 different kinds mixed together in 1 bowl each, because Emma had discovered this was scientifically superior, and he had been unable to construct an argument against it. They sat at the kitchen table. Emma talked about school, about the science fair, about the book Mrs. Patterson had given her last week, about deep-sea creatures, about the plan she was developing for her next project, which was going to be about bioluminescent organisms, and which she described as the dinosaurs of the ocean, except alive and glowing. He listened to all of it. At 9:15, she went quiet. She was looking at her bowl, moving the last of the cereal around in the milk, and she said without looking up, "Is Victoria going to check in on me, like while you're gone?" She offered to. "If that's okay with you?" Emma looked up then. "She seems like someone who keeps her word." "She is." "How can you tell?" He thought about it. People who keep their word have a specific way of saying things. They don't overpromise. They say exactly what they mean, and then they do it. He looked at his daughter. "She said she wanted to be there for your birthday. She didn't say she'd throw you a party or make it the best day of your life. She just said she wanted to be there." Emma processed this with great seriousness. "That is actually more impressive." "Yeah, it is." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Do you love her?" The question landed exactly the way Emma's direct questions always landed, without warning, without softening, aimed with the unerring precision of a child who hasn't yet learned that some questions are supposed to be asked more carefully. Nathan looked at his daughter. He thought about honesty and walls and seeds under weight, and a woman who said, "Come back whole in a doorway," and held a handshake 1 beat too long. "I think," he said carefully, "that I care about her more than I expected to." Emma considered this with the gravity of a philosopher evaluating a significant claim. That's a very grown-up way of saying yes. "Go to bed, Em." "I'm just saying, bed." She carried her bowl to the sink, rinsed it the way he'd taught her, and came back and hugged him, the locked, complete, full commitment hug, the one that said everything she wasn't quite saying out loud. "Come back," she said. "I always come back." "I know." She pulled back and looked up at him. "But come back to something good this time, okay? Not just to the house and the job and the same as before. Come back to something different." He looked at her. "Mrs. Patterson says life doesn't hold still," Emma said. "She says it moves whether you're watching or not, and the smart thing is to move with it instead of trying to make it wait." "Since when are you and Mrs. Patterson having philosophical conversations?" "We have them every day when you're at work." She shrugged. "She's very wise. Also, she makes better hot chocolate than you." "That is aggressively false." "It has little marshmallows, Dad. Yours doesn't." She went to bed. He sat at the kitchen table in the quiet of the house. He looked at Emma's bowl still in the drying rack. He looked at the framed photo of the second-place ribbon on his office desk, visible through the open door. He looked at the small note in Emma's handwriting that she'd stuck to the refrigerator 3 weeks ago that said "Dad, apple juice" in her phonetic spelling with a small drawing of an apple that somehow also looked like a rocket ship. He thought about moving with life instead of making it wait. He thought about what he would come back to. Not just the house, not just the structure, but the possibility that had taken shape over 10 weeks in a glass-walled office building across a table at Mac's Diner at midnight in a conference room where a woman had said, "I'll be here," and meant it. He didn't sleep much. At 4:30 in the morning, he got up, made coffee, and sat with it in the quiet. At 6 o'clock, his phone buzzed. "Victoria. Thinking of you both today. Safe travels, Commander." He stared at it for a long moment. Then he typed back, "Take care of her birthday." 3 dots. Then, like it's my own. He set the phone down. He picked up his coffee. Outside, the sky was starting to go from black to the particular deep blue that comes just before dawn, the color of the ocean at altitude, the color of something that is ending and beginning at the same time. And he sat with it, and he let himself want the thing. He'd been carefully not wanting, and the wanting felt not like loss, not like danger, but like something returning from a long time away, like something coming back, like himself. He stood up, straightened his spine, the way 22 years of service had made involuntary, and he went to wake his daughter for the last morning before he left. He was going to make her real orange juice. And when he came back, and he was coming back, that was never in question. That was the only thing that was never in question. He was going to do what Emma and Mrs. Patterson and Linda and every honest instinct he'd suppressed for 4 years of careful living had been telling him. He was going to stop making life wait. The first 2 weeks of deployment were the hardest. The way the first 2 weeks always were, not because of the work, but because of the adjustment. The recalibration of the self that happened every time Nathan Reed stepped off American soil and into the compressed high-stakes world of an active Navy operation. The part of him that was a father had to stand down so that the part of him that was a commander could function, and that standing down was never clean, never complete, and never stopped costing him something he couldn't entirely name. He called Emma on the 4th day. It was 6 a.m. her time, and she answered on the second ring, which meant she'd been awake already, which meant she'd been waiting. "Dad?" "Hey, Em, you sleeping okay?" "Mostly. Mrs. Patterson lets me sleep on her couch sometimes, when the house feels too quiet." He held the phone and breathed through the particular quality of pain that sentence contained. "That's good. She's good company." "She made me try her egg salad yesterday. I was diplomatic about it." "Was it bad?" "Dad, it was so bad. But she looked so happy that I had seconds." He laughed, a real one, unexpected, the kind that came from somewhere below the operational surface. "That's my girl." "How are you? Are you okay? You sound compressed." "Compressed. Like when you're trying to sound normal but there's a lot going on behind it, your voice gets smaller." He paused. 22 years in the Navy and his 9-year-old 9 as of 3 days ago, a birthday he'd missed the specific ache of which he'd been carrying since 11:59 p.m. the night before, could read his voice like a barometer. "I'm okay," he said. Genuinely. Just busy. "Okay." She said it with the measured acceptance she'd been practicing her whole life. "Dad, Victoria came for my birthday." He'd known this was coming. Mrs. Patterson had texted him a photo the night of, the kind of photo that required him to sit alone with it for a while before he could respond to it properly. Emma at a table, a proper cake in front of her. Not a store-bought sheet cake, but a real one, decorated with small fondant dinosaurs. A telescope rendered in blue icing across the top, and beside her Victoria Hale in jeans and a simple shirt, with her hair down, laughing at something Emma had just said, looking more like a person than Nathan had ever seen her look in any photograph or any professional setting. He'd stared at that photo for a long time. "I know," he said. "Mrs. Patterson told me. She brought a telescope, Dad. Like a real one. Not a toy, A real telescope with a mount and everything, and she sat with me for 2 hours after dinner while I tried to find Saturn, and when I found it..." Emma stopped. He could hear her working through the emotion of it, the same way he worked through emotion, the same internal process he'd apparently passed directly into her genetic material. "When I found it, she got as excited as I was. She wasn't pretending. She was actually excited." "Yeah," he said softly. "That sounds like her." "She stayed until 9:30. We talked about bioluminescent organisms. She knows about them, Dad. She knew about anglerfish specifically. Did you know anglerfish have this light that grows out of their head to attract prey, and it's actually a bacterial symbiosis?" "I did not know that. Victoria did. She looked it up while we were talking because she wanted to make sure she was getting the details right." Emma paused. "Dad, most adults don't look things up in front of me. They just nod. She actually looked it up." He pressed his thumb and forefinger against his eyes briefly. "She's thorough. She's great," Emma said, with the directness of someone who does not deal in half measures when the evidence is clear. "I'm just telling you that so you know. She's great, and you should do something about that when you get home. Emma Grace. I'm 9 now. I'm allowed to have opinions about things. You've been having opinions about things since you were 4. Now they're more mature opinions." He could hear her smiling. He held on to it, the specific frequency of his daughter's voice when she was happy, and filed it somewhere inside himself for the days ahead when he would need it. "I love you, Em," he said. "I love you too, Dad." A pause. "Come home." "Working on it." What Nathan didn't know, what he couldn't know 8,000 miles away, in a situation that required every professional faculty he possessed, was what was happening back home. Victoria had found the file on a Thursday. She hadn't been looking for it. She'd asked her head of HR to pull historical records on a former employee benefits case her legal team needed to reference, and what came back included in a stack of documents from 4 years earlier a report from an incident that had happened at the Hale Technologies satellite office in Norfolk, Virginia. An incident involving the gas leak. A building evacuation. 4 employees who hadn't made it out on the initial sweep, one of whom had been trapped on the 3rd floor with a mobility impairment and had been unreachable by the time emergency services arrived. And a Navy officer off duty who had been in the building for a meeting with the facilities department who had gone back in. Twice. Who had brought out 2 employees on the first entry and gone back for the 3rd, and then located the 4th and remained with her until emergency services could reach them both, a period of approximately 19 minutes in a building with deteriorating air quality. Who had, when the building manager and the company's VP of operations had tried to identify and formally recognize the individual responsible for preventing what would otherwise have been a very different outcome, given a first name, only declined all follow-up contact and disappeared back into the Navy with the unremarkable efficiency of someone who considers the action its own reward and the recognition an unnecessary complication. The first name in the report was Nathan. Victoria read it 3 times. Then she sat very still in her office for a long while. She knew it was him. Knew it with the specific certainty that doesn't require proof, because it fits so precisely with everything else that it couldn't be. Coincidence, couldn't be a different Nathan, couldn't be anything other than what it was. 4 years ago, before she'd ever met him, before he'd ever walked into a restaurant to rescue her from a man who was looking at her stock price instead of her face, he had walked into one of her buildings and pulled her people out of it and asked for nothing, told no one, gone back to his ship or his base or his daughter's dinner table, and simply continued being Nathan Reed, the same man who framed a second-place ribbon and remembered how Emma took her juice and made coffee too dark and never pretended the empty seat at the kitchen table wasn't the shape of something missing. She picked up her phone and called her VP of operations, a steady woman named Renata who had been with the company for 9 years and had been in that Norfolk office the day of the incident. "Renata, I'm looking at an incident report from 4 years ago, the Norfolk gas leak." A brief pause. "I remember it." "The Navy officer who went back in, who brought out the 4 employees." "Yes." Renata's voice shifted slightly, the way voices shift when you touch something that still carries weight. We tried for 2 weeks to find him through official channels. Got stonewalled every time. He'd given his first name to the facilities manager, but nothing else, and the Navy doesn't exactly provide personnel information on request. His name was Nathan, Victoria said. Yes. Another pause. Ms. Hale, do you know who he is? Victoria looked out the east-facing window. The afternoon light was coming in at an angle the way it did in this room that she'd specifically chosen for this room, because of this specific quality of light, which she'd never told anyone, and which now felt in this particular moment like a very small detail in a much larger picture. He's someone I know, she said. Yes. She sat with the file for the rest of the afternoon. She thought about the way Nathan had told her in the diner at midnight, that a person's value wasn't measured by what they owned, but by how they treated people who couldn't give them anything back. She'd thought at the time that it was a good sentence, honest and clean, the way his good sentences always were. She understood now that it wasn't a philosophy he'd arrived at. It was a description of how he already lived. He'd gone back into that building for 4 people he didn't know. Had asked for nothing. Had gone home to his daughter and his deployment schedule and his 5 a.m. mornings and his coffee that was always too dark, and he had never mentioned it. Not once. Not as a credential, not as evidence, not as the thing a man might reasonably offer when he was trying to make a case for himself. Because he wasn't trying to make a case for himself. That was the thing. He never was. She went home that evening, and she sat in the good kitchen she used primarily for sparkling water. And she understood fully and clearly, and without any remaining ambiguity, that she was in love with Nathan Reed. Had been probably since the diner. Since he'd asked the waitress for cherry pie like a man who ate wherever he happened to be, and was genuinely fine with that. Since he'd said "I noticed," and held her gaze without flinching, and without making it into something she needed to respond to in any particular way. Since the morning he'd told her Emma had a science fair, and she might want to know how it turned out, and then walked into his office and let the door close between them, giving her the information and the privacy of her reaction simultaneously, with the unerring instinct of someone who knows exactly how much space a person needs. She loved him. The problem was that he was 8,000 miles away, and the last thing he'd said to her was, "I always come back," and she was sitting alone in a kitchen with very good appliances and no one to cook for, and the gap between knowing something and being able to do anything about it was exactly as wide as the distance between here and wherever the Navy had sent him. She picked up her phone. She didn't call him. His communication windows were limited, and she knew better than to use them unnecessarily. She texted instead the way she'd been texting through the deployment in the careful, measured register they'd established. Nothing that asked too much of him when he was in a situation that required everything. She typed, "I found something today. Something I need to tell you when you're back. Nothing wrong. Just important." The response came 6 hours later, which meant it was the middle of the night for him, which meant he'd woken up or hadn't been sleeping. "I'm listening." She smiled at the phone. Of course he was listening. He was always listening. Not like this, she typed. "When you're home, in person. Over bad diner coffee if you're willing." A longer pause this time. Then Max. "First Saturday back." First Saturday back, she confirmed. She put the phone down. She didn't sleep particularly well either. Chat Penteg. The board meeting happened on a Tuesday 3 weeks into Nathan's deployment, and it was not what Victoria had expected. Not in the way difficult things were, never quite what you expected them to be. She'd called the meeting herself, which wrong-footed the board immediately, because Victoria Hale did not call unscheduled board meetings unless something significant was happening. And significant things happening at Hale Technologies generally meant the board needed to be concerned. And concerned board members were combative board members, and combative board members at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday were a particular variety of difficult. There were 7 of them around the table, men and women who had been with the company since its 3rd year, who had watched it grow from a promising regional firm into a genuine national player who had financial stakes in its continued success that were meaningful enough to make their opinions feel to them at least like more than opinions. Richard Calloway spoke first because Richard Calloway always spoke first because Richard Calloway had been a partner at a financial firm for 30 years before joining the board and believed that whoever spoke first controlled the room, which was true often enough that the belief had never been meaningfully challenged. Victoria, you asked us here without a formal agenda. That's unusual. I know. I'll explain why. There are market rumors about the Washington expansion. Are we here about that? We are in part. She looked at the table, then at the board, but not in the way you're thinking. Richard sat back. Then enlighten us. She'd prepared what she was going to say the way she prepared everything thoroughly with multiple iterations, every word chosen for precision. But when she opened her mouth, what came out was something slightly different from the prepared version. Cleaner somehow. More true. I've been made aware, she said, that several members of this board and at least 2 significant investors have concerns about certain personal associations that have developed during the recent security consultation. Specifically concerns about how those associations might appear publicly and what implications they might have for the company's image and market positioning. Silence around the table. Gerald Fitch, who had the specific quality of discomfort that comes from being accurately described, shifted in his chair. Victoria, if you're referring to, I'm referring, she said, to the fact that there are people in this room or connected to this room who believe that my relationship with a Navy officer and single father is a liability to Hale Technologies. Another silence, this one more charged. I want to be clear about something, she said. I'm not here to ask permission. I'm not here to explain myself or justify my personal life to anyone at this table. I'm here because I believe in transparency with this board, and because what I'm about to tell you is something you're entitled to know, even if the conclusion I've reached is not one you can change. Richard leaned forward slightly. Victoria, I found a file this week, she said. 4 years ago, there was a gas leak at our Norfolk satellite office. 4 employees were trapped inside during the evacuation. A Navy officer off-duty who happened to be in the building for a routine facilities meeting went back in. Twice. He brought out 3 people on his own. He stayed with the 4th until emergency services could reach her. He asked for nothing afterward, gave only his first name, went back to his ship. She paused. The room was very quiet. The man in that report, she said, is the same man some of you believe represents a reputational risk to this company because he is a single parent who does not come from money and does not exist in the social circles that make certain investors comfortable. She let that sit for a moment. I want to say something, and I want you to hear it clearly. She looked around the table at each of them in turn. I built this company, not with inherited capital, not with family connections, not with the safety nets that several people in this room started with. I built it because I was good at what I do, and I worked until I was better, and I held this organization together through 3 economic downturns and a global pandemic and a federal investigation that turned out to be nothing but still cost us 8 months of disrupted operations. She kept her voice level. I have earned the right to make decisions about my own life without submitting them for board approval. And I have enough respect for this table to tell you directly I will not be making any different decisions because of market optics. Gerald Fitch tried. The Washington expansion would benefit from a more managed public profile. The Washington expansion, Victoria said, will succeed or fail based on the quality of our work, the reliability of our team, and the strength of our government relationships. It will not succeed or fail based on who I have dinner with on a Saturday night. Richard studied her for a long moment. He had the expression of a man running calculations, which was what he always looked like and what she'd always respected about him, even when it was inconvenient. You've made your position clear, he said finally. I have. And the Washington timeline? On track. I'll have a full briefing for the board by the end of the month. He nodded. Slowly. All right. She looked at the rest of the table. Gerald had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. The others were in various stages of recalibration. Are there other items? She asked. There were not. The meeting ended at 9:47. She walked back to her office and closed the door and stood at the east-facing window and felt not triumphant, not vindicated, but clear. The specific clarity of having said something exactly true in a room that needed to hear it without performance, without armor, just the truth laid out plainly and left to stand on its own. Her phone buzzed. "Renata. You were formidable in there, just so you know." She smiled. Then her phone buzzed again, and it was a number she'd saved under a contact name that just said N because that was as much as she was going to admit to herself at the time she saved it, and the message said, "Communication window today, 2 p.m. your time, 20 minutes, available if you want to use it." She looked at the time. 10:03 a.m. She spent the next hour and 57 minutes trying to work and thinking about what she wanted to say in 20 minutes. She called at exactly 2 o'clock. He answered on the first ring. "Victoria?" Just her name. The way he said it with that specific, careful weight, like it was something he was being precise about, and she felt it the same way she felt it every time, the same recognition. "Nathan, how are you?" Functional. A beat. "Better than yesterday." "What happened yesterday?" "Nothing dramatic. Just a long day that felt longer than it was." His voice had the quality she'd described to Emma as compressed, smaller than usual, working harder to sound ordinary. "You said you found something." "I did." She took a breath. "The Norfolk incident, 4 years ago, the gas leak at the satellite office." A silence. "How did you find that?" he asked. "HR records pull. My legal team needed a reference document from that period. It came with the file." She paused. "Nathan, that was 4 of my employees." Another silence longer. "It was a situation that needed handling," he said. "You went back in twice. The situation required it." "Nathan." "Victoria, I'm not going to make more of it than—" "Stop." She said it quietly, not harshly. "Stop doing the thing where you minimize what you did so that I don't have to feel the weight of it. You walked back into a building with a gas leak for people you didn't know. You asked for nothing. You didn't even tell me, and you've had months of opportunities to tell me, and you chose not to, which means you genuinely didn't consider it relevant information." She stopped, gathered the next sentence carefully. "Do you understand how rare that is? Do you understand that most people given the opportunity to tell a story that makes them look like a hero to someone they're trying to—" She caught herself. "Someone they're trying to—" "What?" he asked. His voice was very still. She made the decision. Clear, clean, no more careful management of the distance between what was true and what was safe to say. "Someone they care about," she said. "Most people tell that story. You never did." He was quiet for a moment. "It wasn't relevant." "It was completely relevant." "To what?" "To who you are." She pressed her free hand against the desk in front of her, needing something solid. "Nathan, I have spent my entire professional life learning to identify what people actually are underneath what they're presenting. It's how I've survived, built this company, navigated the investors, managed, the board made decisions about who to trust with what. And I am telling you that in 15 years of doing that work, I have almost never met someone who was exactly what they appeared to be, who was in private and in public, and apparently in the middle of a building emergency 4 years before I ever met them exactly the same person." She heard him exhale. Not the tiny controlled exhale, the full one. "You said there's a board concerned about our association," he said. "There was. I addressed it this morning." Victoria. "I told them that decisions about my personal life were not subject to board approval, and that the timeline on the Washington expansion was unaffected." She paused. "I also told them what you did in Norfolk. I needed them to understand who they were talking about." A long silence. "You didn't need to do that," he said. "I know. I wanted to." She looked out the window. "Nathan, I need you to come home." 12 days, he said. "Give or take. 12 days. Max, first Saturday." "First Saturday," she confirmed, and her voice did something she didn't entirely have control over. Something that made her sound less armored, more present, more like the version of herself she'd been finding gradually and with some difficulty over the course of the past months. "Victoria." His voice had changed too, softer at the edges, the compression easing. "Are you okay right now today? Not the board, not the company, you." She thought about the honest answer. "I'm better than I was," she said. "I'm better than I was 6 months ago, or a year ago, or any point I can clearly remember before a Navy officer walked into a restaurant and decided a phone call wasn't sufficient." She paused. "You did that. The better than I was. You should know." "Emma helped," he said. "Emma is extraordinary, and I will argue that point with anyone who disagrees, but she came with you. The package deal was non-negotiable." A silence, and in the silence she could hear him almost smiling the same way he almost smiled in person, the one she'd catalogued without meaning to. 12 days, he said. "I know. I'll call Emma tomorrow if the window's open. She'll be up. She's been staying at Mrs. Patterson's most nights. She says the house is too quiet, but I think she just likes Mrs. Patterson's television." She does. Mrs. Patterson watches nature documentaries exclusively, and Emma considers this a sophisticated choice. It is a sophisticated choice. Don't tell her that. She'll use it in an argument. Victoria laughed, the real one, the full one, the involuntary kind. She heard him on the other end of the line and knew by the quality of his silence that he was holding on to it the way she'd learned he held on to Emma's voice when he called, filing it somewhere for the days when he needed it. "Go do your job," she said. "Come home." "Both of those things are happening," he said, "in that order." "Good." "Victoria." "Yeah." He said her name again just once more, the way he sometimes did when he was deciding whether to say the thing underneath the thing. And then he said, "I know what I'm coming home to. That helps." She pressed her lips together briefly. "Good," she said again softly this time. "It should." 12 days. Victoria learned things about the specific texture of waiting that she hadn't known before because she had never waited for anything in quite this way. She had waited for contracts, for verdicts, for market movements, for board decisions, the professional varieties of waiting, each with its own strategies for management and mitigation. This was different. This was the kind of waiting that doesn't have a mitigation strategy, the kind that just requires you to keep moving through ordinary days while something important exists outside the frame of those days, beyond your visibility, in a place you can't monitor or manage or control. She kept working. She always kept working. It was the structure that had carried her through everything, the one constant she trusted completely. The Washington expansion moved forward. She briefed the board at the end of the month precisely as promised. Gerald Fitch was professional and correct, and slightly warmer than he'd been before the meeting, which she chose to interpret as a form of apology. She saw Emma twice in the 12 days. The first time was a Saturday afternoon. She'd texted Mrs. Patterson to ask if Emma might want company for the afternoon, framed it as casually as she could manage, and Mrs. Patterson had responded with the particular warmth of a woman who has been paying very close attention to everyone in her orbit and is delighted by what she's observing. Emma met her at the door of Mrs. Patterson's house with her newest library book under one arm, and an expression of uncomplicated pleasure that Victoria found more disarming than almost anything a boardroom had ever produced. "You came back," Emma said. "I said I would." "I know." Emma stepped aside to let her in. "Do you want to see Saturn?" "The seeing conditions are good today. I've been checking." The seeing conditions. That's the technical term for atmospheric clarity as it affects telescope observation. I looked it up. Of course you did. They spent 2 hours in Mrs. Patterson's backyard, Emma running the telescope with practiced efficiency. Victoria standing beside her while Emma explained in precise, patient, enthusiastic detail the mechanics of what they were looking at and why it mattered. Mrs. Patterson brought out a plate of cookies at some point and sat with them for a while, and Victoria noticed that the old woman looked between her and the chair beside the telescope, the chair where Emma had arranged a folded blanket, as if preparing for a regular occurrence, with an expression of quiet satisfaction. "Emma tells me her father's home in about a week," Mrs. Patterson said. "That's right. She's been counting, very precisely." Mrs. Patterson offered Victoria a cookie. "The way children count down to things they're not quite sure are real yet." Victoria took the cookie. "It's real. I know it is." Mrs. Patterson looked at her steadily, with the unhurried assessment of someone who has seen several decades of human behavior and is rarely surprised by any of it. "He's a good man, Commander Reed." "He is. Stubborn, carries too much alone, convinced himself for a while that the carrying was the same as the providing." She paused. "He's come around on that somewhat. I think he had help." Victoria looked at her. Mrs. Patterson smiled and offered her another cookie. "I'm 73. I've earned the right to be direct." She patted Victoria's arm once gently. "He needed someone to see him. Not the uniform, not the function, not the capable father, or the decorated officer. Him." She nodded once. "You did that. Don't underestimate what that was worth." Victoria sat with that for the rest of the afternoon. The second time she saw Emma was 4 days before Nathan came home a Tuesday evening, when she stopped by with the specific book about deep-sea bioluminescence that she'd tracked down through a specialized science publisher, because the library's copy had a 3-month wait list, and Emma's enthusiasm about anglerfish and bacterial symbiosis deserved better than a 3-month wait list. Emma opened the package and was silent for a full 5 seconds, which Victoria understood by now was the Emma Reed version of speechless. "This is the Liechtenstein edition," Emma said. "The publisher told me it's considered the definitive reference text. It has a chapter on the dragonfish." Emma looked up. Her eyes were bright. "Victoria, it has a whole chapter on the dragonfish." "I saw. These are considered some of the most sophisticated predators in the deep sea. Most people don't even know they exist." "Most people don't look closely enough at things that live in the dark," Victoria said. Emma looked at her with the sudden piercing quality of a child who understands subtext before she's supposed to. "Like people sometimes," she said. "Sometimes, yes." Emma hugged her. Without preamble, without announcement, just stepped forward and locked both arms around her waist, the way she apparently hugged everyone important to her, complete and committed, and entirely without qualification. Victoria stood there for a moment, hands slightly raised in the surprised instinct of someone who hasn't been hugged like this in longer than she could track, and then she put her arms around Emma Reed and held on. The book was still in Emma's hand. She could feel the corner of it against her back. "I'm glad you came to my birthday," Emma said into her jacket. "I'm glad you let me. Dad's going to be really happy to be home. I know. He's going to pretend he's just tired at first." Emma's voice was matter-of-fact. "He always does that. He gets home and he says he's tired and he sleeps for about 12 hours and then he's himself again." "Good to know. Then he'll want to talk about everything, but he won't know how to start." Emma pulled back and looked up at her. "You might have to start it." Victoria looked at this 9-year-old who had been reading her father like a map her entire life, and felt something in her chest arrange itself into something new and permanent, and entirely unplanned. "I'll start it," she said. Emma nodded, satisfied. "Good." She looked at the book again. "Will you stay for dinner? Mrs. Patterson makes pasta on Tuesdays. It's actually good. I'm not being diplomatic." "I'd like that," Victoria said. She stayed for dinner. Mrs. Patterson made pasta. It was, in fact, genuinely good. They sat at a kitchen table that had held decades of ordinary Tuesday evenings, and they talked Emma about the dragonfish. Mrs. Patterson about a documentary she'd watched the previous evening. Victoria about nothing important and everything real. And it felt like something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Something she'd almost forgotten was available to her. It felt like home. Not the architectural kind, the other kind. The kind made of people and pasta on Tuesdays, and a 9-year-old explaining the predatory strategies of deep-sea fish, and an old woman refilling everyone's water glass without being asked, and the empty chair at the table that would in 4 days not be empty anymore. She drove home at 9:30. Sat in her apartment that was very well designed and very quiet, and very precisely the life she'd built when she'd believed that building something powerful was the same as building something meaningful. She understood now, with the particular clarity that arrives after a long period of careful and honest work, that it wasn't the same thing. She picked up her phone. She thought about texting Nathan. She put the phone down. Some things were better said in person, at max. Over coffee that was too dark and cherry pie. 4 days. She could wait 4 more days. She turned off the lights and went to bed, and for the first time in a long while, the quiet didn't feel like absence. It felt like the particular stillness of something about to begin, the held breath before the first word of something important, the last moment before a current shifts direction and carries you somewhere new. She closed her eyes. 4 days. Nathan's plane landed on a Thursday, not Saturday. Thursday, 2 days earlier than the projected window, because the operation had concluded cleanly, and Captain Whitfield had signed the early release without ceremony, the way she did things that didn't require ceremony, which was most things. He texted Mrs. Patterson from the tarmac. He texted Emma's school. He did not text Victoria, and he sat with that decision for the 40-minute drive from the base to the house, examining it the way you examine a decision you've already made, to confirm you made it for the right reasons. He had. The reason was simple. He wanted to see her in person before she knew he was coming. Not as a surprise, not a performance of anything, but because he'd spent 12 weeks making plans in his head, and plans were one thing, and the actual moment of walking back into your life was another, and he needed the actual moment first. He needed to be home to see Emma, to stand in his own kitchen and feel the shape of the life he'd been missing before he could say anything that was worth saying. He pulled up to the house at 2:15 in the afternoon. Mrs. Patterson's door opened before he'd finished parking. The woman had radar she always had probably known he was coming before his own wheels touched down. She stood on her porch and looked at him with the unhurried satisfaction of someone whose expectations have been confirmed, and she said, "Nathan Reed, you look like you need a meal." "I need to pick up Emma first. She gets out at 3:15. You have an hour." She waved him toward her door. "Come eat something. I made soup." He went. He sat at her kitchen table, the same table where Victoria and Emma had eaten pasta on a Tuesday 4 days ago, though he didn't know that yet. And Mrs. Patterson put a bowl in front of him and sat across from him and didn't ask him questions, which was one of the things he'd always appreciated most about her. She understood that some arrivals needed silence before they needed words. He ate. He felt the specific restoration that comes from eating food made by someone who cared whether you ate it. A sensation he'd been without for 12 weeks, and whose absence he'd stopped noticing until its return, made the absence suddenly legible. "She's doing well," Mrs. Patterson said when the soup was half gone. "Emma." "I know. She told me. She missed you the right way, not the falling apart way, the holding on until you're back way." Mrs. Patterson refilled his water glass without asking. "She's a remarkable child." "She is." Comes by it honestly. A pause. The particular pause of a 73-year-old woman with decades of practice at saying the thing she means, without making it a bigger deal than the person can handle. "Victoria came by twice while you were gone." "I know that too." "She brought Emma a telescope." "I heard about the telescope." "And a book about fish that glow in the dark, which Emma has now read approximately 3 times and considers among the finest literature currently in print." Mrs. Patterson looked at him steadily. "She's a good woman, Nathan." "I know." "You going to do something about it?" He looked at her. "Saturday." Mrs. Patterson nodded once with the expression of someone filing a confirmed reservation. "Good." He picked Emma up at 3:15, standing at the school entrance, the way he always did, the same spot, the same waiting. The doors opened, and kids came out in the usual cascade of backpacks and noise, and the particular unleashed energy of children, freed from institutional structure, for another day. Emma came through the doors and saw him and stopped completely for one full second. Just stopped mid-step, like the world had briefly paused for loading, and then she was running flat-out backpack, bouncing the same full-commitment sprint she'd deployed the morning before he'd left, and she hit him at full speed, and he caught her and lifted her, and she wrapped around him, the way she had when she was 4 and 5 and 6. Before she'd decided she was too old for being carried, and apparently deployment reset the too old threshold, because she held on like she intended to stay there. He held her back. Both arms full commitment, his face against her hair. "You're early," she said, muffled against his shoulder. "Operation ended clean." "You didn't tell me." "Wanted to be here first." She pulled back enough to look at him. Her eyes were bright the way they got when she was trying to be steady, and the steadiness was costing her something. "You look tired." "I'm always tired. But the good kind. The done kind." She studied his face with the focused assessment she'd been doing her whole life. "Yeah, the done kind." He set her down. She took his hand, which she also hadn't done in public in about 2 years, and led him toward the truck. "Dad," she said as they walked. "Yeah." "Are you going to see Victoria this week?" He unlocked the truck. "Saturday." Emma climbed in, settled her backpack, looked at him with her mother's eyes. "Good," she said with a decisiveness that closed the subject entirely. "That's good." Saturday arrived, the way important days arrive when you've been counting toward them slowly, and then all at once, the accumulated waiting suddenly resolved into a specific morning, a specific time, a specific place. Nathan dropped Emma at Mrs. Patterson's at 11 o'clock. Emma, who had been unusually and suspiciously calm all morning, packed her bag for Mrs. Patterson's, with the efficiency of someone who has been planning this handoff for days, kissed him on the cheek at the door, and said simply, "Don't overthink it." "I'm not." "You are. You've been doing the face since breakfast." "What face?" "The one where you're composing sentences in your head and deciding if they're adequate." She picked up her bag. "They're adequate, Dad. Just say them." She went inside. He sat in the truck for a moment. He drove to Max. Victoria was already there. He saw her through the window before he went in the same window he'd looked through the night he'd walked into a restaurant and changed the direction of both their lives without knowing it. She was in the corner booth, both hands around a coffee mug, looking at nothing in particular with the slightly inward expression she had when she was thinking through something she hadn't finished resolving yet. She looked like a person. Just a person. His favorite version of her, the one without the armor, without the boardroom calibration, without any of the careful management of how she appeared to the world. Just Victoria in a corner booth at Max waiting. He went inside. Donna was working. Of course. Donna was working. Donna was always working, and she looked up from the counter as he came in, clocked the booth, and gave him the evaluating gaze of someone who has watched this particular story developing from its opening pages. "Coffee?" Donna asked. "Please." He walked to the booth. Victoria looked up when he was 3 steps away, and her face, he'd thought about her face for 12 weeks, had held it in the place in his mind where he kept the important things. But the actual face across a real table in the specific light of Mac's Diner, on a Saturday morning, was different from memory. The way the actual ocean was always different from the memory of it. She looked at him like he was something she'd been waiting for, without being certain the waiting would be rewarded, and the relief in her expression was completely unguarded, entirely unmanaged, and the most honest thing he'd seen in 12 weeks. "You're early," she said. "Thursday." "You could have told me." "I needed to be home first." He sat down across from her. "Emma first, then you." She nodded. "That's the right order." Donna brought his coffee. He wrapped his hands around it too dark exactly. Right, the same coffee he'd been drinking at this table since a midnight rescue that had turned out to be a rescue in every direction. "You said you found something," he said. "I did?" She looked at him steadily. "Norfolk, 4 years ago." He held her gaze. "Victoria." "Let me say it," she said. I've been composing it for 12 weeks, and I need to say it in order, or I'll lose the thread. He was quiet. I found the incident report, she said. 4 of my employees. A building you had no obligation to go back into. A name you gave that was just a first name. 12 years of government service, and you walked into that building because it needed doing, and you walked back out and went back to your life. She held his gaze the whole time, steady and direct, the way she was when something mattered most. I've been in business for 15 years. I have evaluated hundreds of people, their intentions, their values, the distance between who they present and who they actually are. And I am telling you, Nathan, that you are the most consistently, completely yourself person I have ever met. In the Norfolk file, and in the diner, and in your office, and on the phone, from 8,000 miles away, and right now sitting here, the same person every time, AIM. He didn't say anything for a moment. The diner moved around them, the clatter of the kitchen. Donna refilling a cup at the counter, the couple in the far booth having what appeared to be a gentle argument about something neither of them seemed committed to winning. I wasn't looking for recognition, he said. I know, that's the part that matters. She set her mug down. Nathan, I need to say something else, and I need you to let me say it without interrupting, because you have a tendency to redirect when things get too real. Too real, she confirmed. Yes. He folded his hands around his coffee cup. I won't interrupt. She took a breath. I am in love with you. I've been in love with you since approximately midnight in this booth when you asked me what I wanted to eat and waited for the actual answer instead of making a recommendation or ordering for me or doing any of the things people do when they're trying to impress someone rather than actually see them. She paused. I'm not saying it to put pressure on anything, or to ask for anything specific, or because I have a plan for what comes next. I'm saying it because you went back into a burning building for strangers and never told anyone, and you framed second-place ribbons, and you raised the most extraordinary 9-year-old I've ever met, and you said you knew what it was, and I need you to know that I know too, and I've known for a long time. And I'm done being careful about saying it. The diner was quiet around them, in the way only some moments are quiet, not the absence of sound, but the presence of something more important than sound. Nathan looked at the woman across the table from him. He looked at her the way he'd been looking at her since a Saturday night, when she'd exhaled completely for the first time outside a restaurant door. The way you look at something you've been circling for a long time before you allow yourself to go directly toward it. He thought about Emma at the school door. Don't overthink it. He thought about Linda. The box was never for Sarah. He thought about Mrs. Patterson. You did that. Don't underestimate what that was worth. He thought about 12 weeks of a name saved in his phone, under a single initial, and a photo he'd looked at more times than he was going to admit, and the specific way she said, "Come back whole" in a doorway, and what it had meant to know, across 8,000 miles and 3 months of compressed silence, that this was what he was coming back to. Victoria, he said. Yeah, I've been in love with you since you ate cherry pie, like you'd forgotten you were allowed to enjoy things, and then remembered. She looked at him. Since you asked what Emma was like and waited for the real answer, he said. Since you showed up to her birthday with a real telescope and looked at Saturn and got genuinely excited and didn't perform any of it for anyone. He held her gaze. Since you stood in front of your board and told them who I was, not because it benefited you to say it, but because it was true, and they needed to hear it. He paused. I have been carrying this across 12 weeks, and a deployment, and a lot of early mornings, and I'm done being careful about it too. She exhaled. The full one. The real one. Okay, she said softly. Okay, he said. Donna appeared with the coffee pot and the particular expression of someone who has witnessed this exact scene from behind a counter and considers it a reasonable outcome. She refilled their cups without commentary, which was perhaps the most generous thing she could have done, and went back to the counter. They sat with the coffee and the morning and the specific quality of a moment after which things are different. Emma knows, Nathan said. I know she knows, Victoria said. She told me the week before you got back, that you were going to be happy to come home. She was very certain about it. She's certain about most things. She also told me you'd need 12 hours of sleep and then you'd want to talk, but wouldn't know how to start. He looked at her. She said that. She suggested I might need to start it. She's 9. She's formidably 9. Victoria turned her coffee cup in her hands. She's going to be extraordinary, Nathan. Whatever she decides to do, she already is. Yeah. He felt it the way he always felt it, the particular fullness of being Emma's father, the thing that had held him together when everything else was tilting. She is. I'd like to be part of that, Victoria said. Not as a replacement for anything, not overstepping anything, just... She looked at him directly. I'd like to be someone she can call, someone who shows up when there's a birthday or a science fair or a bad day, someone in her life who isn't going anywhere. She already considers you that, he said. She decided a while ago. You didn't get a vote. Victoria almost laughed. Did you get a vote? On most things, Emma decides no. This time, she did laugh, the full one, the real one, the involuntary kind that changed her whole face. He held on to it the same way he'd held on to it across the phone line from 8,000 miles away, and it was better in person. Everything was better in person. I'm still in the Navy, he said, because honesty was the foundation of everything they'd built, and he wasn't going to sand the edges now. I have another deployment on the calendar, probably 6 months from now, possibly longer than the last one. I know. My life is complicated. Emma is a full-time commitment on top of everything else. The schedule is, it's never clean, Victoria. It's never going to be the kind of life that's easy to fit alongside what you're building. Nathan, she leaned forward slightly. I built a company from 2 maxed-out credit cards and 4 hours of sleep a night for 6 years. I have sat across from a federal board and negotiated classified contracts and managed a brother who creates emergencies for me to clean up, and a board that has opinions about my personal life. She held his gaze. Complicated is not a deterrent. Complicated is just the actual texture of things that are worth having. He was quiet for a moment. Okay, he said. Okay. Yeah. He looked at her. Okay. She sat back. Something in her face settled not into relief exactly, but into the expression of someone who has been holding a weight at arm's length for a long time and has finally been permitted to set it down. That's it. After 12 weeks and a deployment and all of this, just okay. You want something more elaborate? I might have prepared for something more elaborate. How elaborate? She considered. At least 2 more sentences. He thought about it. Thought about what was true and what was worth saying in the specific light of this booth, on this morning, in this place where it had started and where it was starting again. Different now, more honest, more deliberate, with both of them, knowing exactly what they were choosing. Here's 2 more sentences, he said. I spent 12 weeks knowing what I was coming home to, and it made everything about the 12 weeks easier. You did that. She looked at him across the table, and her eyes were very bright, and she didn't say anything for a moment, which he understood was not absence, but the opposite fullness, too large for immediate words. Then she said, Donna is definitely watching us. He glanced toward the counter. Donna had the coffee pot and the expression of someone pretending to be busy. Yeah. Should we order pie? It's 11 in the morning. Max serves pie all day. I checked the menu 4 times while I was waiting. He looked at her. She looked at him. There was nothing unresolved between them, nothing careful or managed or held at the arm's length of professional distance. Nothing that needed to be said, that hadn't been said, or that couldn't be said now. Today, tomorrow, in all the ordinary days ahead, that were going to be different from the ordinary days behind. Cherry, he asked. Obviously, she said. He raised 2 fingers toward Donna, who nodded with the satisfaction of someone who already knew what they were having before they ordered it. Outside, the morning was doing what mornings did, moving forward indifferent to the weight of the moments inside it, carrying everything and everyone along in the current, whether they were ready or not. Nathan Reed had spent 4 years trying to hold still inside that current, keeping everything in order, keeping the structure sound, keeping the box sealed because a sealed box was manageable, and manageable felt like enough when enough was all you believed you deserved. He knew better now. Not because someone had taught him, though people had tried in their various ways with their various degrees of success, but because he'd sat in a corner booth at midnight with a woman who'd forgotten she was allowed to enjoy cherry pie, and something in him had recognized something in her, and neither of them had been entirely the same since. The pie came. They ate it. Donna refilled their coffee without being asked, because that was what Donna did, and the couple in the far booth resolved their argument in the way couples at Max always eventually resolved things quietly over coffee, the disagreement dissolving into something smaller than it had appeared. Victoria finished her pie. She set her fork down. She looked at him. "Emma's going to want to show you the telescope tonight," she said. "She's been saving a specific alignment of Jupiter for your return. She says the seeing conditions should be excellent. I'll make dinner first. Real orange juice. Real orange juice." She smiled, and it was the real one, the full one, and across a table at Mac's Diner on a Saturday morning with bad coffee and cherry pie, and Donna watching from the counter with the quiet approval of a woman who has seen enough of life to know when something is finally going right. Nathan Reed looked at Victoria Hale and understood with the same clear-eyed certainty he trusted with his life that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Not at sea. Not in a briefing room. Not standing watch over someone else's emergency in a building full of smoke. Here. Present. His feet on the ground and his coffee in his hands, and the woman he loved across the table, and his daughter at Mrs. Patterson's house, saving Jupiter, waiting for him to come home. He had come home. And this time home was larger than it used to be, larger and warmer and louder, with a 9-year-old who had opinions about planetary classification and pie at 11 in the morning, and a woman who had built an empire and chosen him anyway, not in spite of who he was, but because of exactly who he was. He had walked into a restaurant one night to rescue a woman from a bad date. He had not known walking in that the rescue would go in every direction at once, that he would save her from something small, and she would save him from something enormous, from the sealed box, and the careful management, and the years of functional living that had slowly, quietly stopped being enough. He knew now. They paid the check. They walked out into the morning together, and the morning received them the way the best mornings do, without ceremony, without fanfare, as if this were simply the next moment in a long series of moments, which it was, and which was exactly enough. Nathan Reed had spent 22 years in the United States Navy, learning to navigate by fixed stars, to find his position by identifying what didn't move, what held still, while everything else shifted. He understood now that the fixed stars weren't in the sky. They were at Mrs. Patterson's house, saving Jupiter. They were walking beside him in the morning light. They were the reason he always came back. And he was never, not for a single remaining day of his life, going to make them wait.